Welcome back into One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Ryan Gregware and Sam Davis. And now we're going to get into our Mets-Yankees segment here, as I just can't wait to get into this. Already can't believe it, 2 weeks into the season. I think as a Mets fan, only playing like half of the amount of days, you feel like it's flown by so quick. But that's a team I do want to start off with is these Mets. 5-3, first place in the NL East. And to me, this team in these first 8 games, the starting pitching has really been the story. It's just been outstanding, whether it's been the 7-inning games, of 9-inning games. I mean, they've honestly surprised me. Guys like Taijuan Walker, who, I think a lot of people expected him to be solid, but he's been, really, really good. And same with Marcus Stroman, who's almost looking like an ace right now. And just he added a new pitch and all this stuff. It seems like those two guys are kind of the big surprises. And, especially without Carrasco, without Syndergaard, if you're, already have a solid 5 guys and, right now their fifth starter hasn't even pitched yet just because of all the double headers and everything, Joey Lucchesi. But I think that's going to be, with this Mets team, if this starting pitching is good, I think the hitting will come around and hopefully the bullpen's good enough. But if you can have just shut down starting pitching, it's not only going to be good for the regular season, I think that sets you up good for the playoffs too, which makes me extremely excited for this Mets team.
Yeah, it is early, like as we talked about in the intro, but Taijuan Walker has been just awesome. Like as you talked about, Stroman, obviously, like he's been great, and I saw that coming a little more. He's done it before, but Taijuan Walker, he's really looked good. And, if that's a guy that can be a legit member of this rotation, that's a difference because you talk about this is a great rotation. As we talk about, Syndergaard and Carrasco are only going to help. And so if you can get Walker and shore up, and that's your 5, not going to say that can, compete with the Dodgers or anything like that, but that's up there. That can win playoff series. When especially with DeGrom as the 1, it sets up the rest of the rotation. And Stroman looking more like a 1B than a 2 right now. It is really positive, and it's something that we knew would be a strength going in, right? Starting pitching usually is a strength, but it's been excellent. It's been one of the best in the league.
Yeah, this starting pitching, just to hop on both your points here, is certainly, I would say, definitely the biggest strength of this team, certainly the rotation. It starts from the top with Jacob deGrom, and I know you can say all you want about how good he is, and I'm not going to say he's not. He's an amazing pitcher. He's like a perennial Cy Young. It seems like every year you might as well just give him the award with how well he's doing. But what I do like from Jacob deGrom is just his attitude, because after his team continues to just not give him run support, deGrom still supports his teammates. Whether he says he's not frustrated, I'm not exactly sure if he is or not. He might just be lying just to kind of say that. But it really does seem like he really buys into everything. He understands and he trusts his guys around him and that offense to eventually produce for him and provide that run support that he desperately needs. Because my guess is that deGrom is a little frustrated. It's hard not to be frustrated with pitching that well and losing games. That's definitely frustrating, but the fact that he has a very good attitude and it just shows to me that he's really a true leader of this rotation, and he really sets the tone for everybody else. And like you said, you got Stroman behind him. He's looked great. I think on other staffs, he would be your ace. So the fact that he's that number 2 is awesome. And then you got, Taijuan Walker, you mentioned he's pitched really well, 2.61 ERA, and it's only 2 starts. It's early, but that's very good. I'd say definitely a surprise for this Mets team, but also David Peterson kind of getting back on track in his most recent start. Important. He had a tough start for the first one, but able to kind of get back on track. Those 2 guys are huge while Carrasco and Syndergaard is out. I think those 2 guys kind of glue the rotation together and will certainly help this Mets team win games right now, because I know it's April, but before Carrasco and Syndergaard gets back, it's still important to win a lot of baseball games. The Mets are in a very tight division. It's a very good NL East. The Braves are a very good team. We'll get into them later in the show. But, for me, that Peterson and Taijuan Walker, if they can continue to produce and pitch the way they're pitching right now, this rotation is incredible, because then Carrasco and Syndergaard gets back, and you have an embarrassment of riches. It seems like you almost have too many good starting pitchers. Maybe you send 1 to the bullpen, or even 2 come playoff time, but you got to love this rotation. That's where it starts and ends for the Mets.
I feel like when you say embarrassment of riches, one of those guys will definitely get hurt or something will happen. They already have gotten hurt, but it's great to have that depth. And that to me is the biggest thing. And when you talk about deGrom, it's almost like in 2018 where he made that jump from I was still a really good pitcher, 1 Rookie of the Year, was amazing in the playoffs in 2015. And then like in 2018, where he became the Cy Young pitcher, he almost sold his soul to the devil so he could be the best pitcher, but then gets 0 run support, because it's almost comical now. Because even when the Mets offense is good, he still gets no runs. Like it could be amazing for Taijuan Walker, it could be amazing for Marcus Stroman, and then DeGrom steps up, he goes 8 innings, like no runs, 10 Ks, and then he loses like 1-0 because the bullpen blows it. And like it's crazy. I mean, just how good he is and just the bad luck that he's gotten. And I mean, look, he's the best pitcher in baseball. And I know Yankee fans may say Cole, but it's DeGrom, hand down. And right now, I mean, just I don't know how he does it, because like you would think if someone with no run support, you'd think he'd just get upset at a certain point, but he just keeps going out there, doesn't say a peep. And even if he says stuff positive, even so, it's like it's kind of crazy of how good he is. And definitely agree with just this rotation. If Walker could be the key cog for this team, and you talk about this team trying to get back to May, when you get back the Carrascos and the Syndergaards, and in the bullpen, Seth Lugo, if this team could stay above water until then, and they could stay healthy until then, get those reinforcements back, I think then you're really seriously thinking about how this team could get better in, June, July, which maybe usually with the Mets, it's the opposite. But I mean, I feel like with this team, it could get better down the stretch. Maybe you added a bullpen arm, which I think they'll probably need to do. But with Steve Cohen at the helm, I think he will do that. So that's just kind of how I'm looking at, this starting pitching, as it's going to be a real strength. And starting pitching, I know that it's kind of less importance over the last few years with the bullpen coming up, but if you can have 3-4 starters going into the playoffs, it's going to make you an immediate threat. And we saw it in 2019 with the Nationals, and they were able to down the Dodgers basically because they had 3 dominant starters. So that's what gets me extremely excited about this Mets team. But another thing is, I felt like with this hitting from the Mets, I think the interesting thing is they started off just awful. I mean, there's no other word you can say. No one was hitting, and you thought this lineup was going to be really deep, and you were adding Lindor and James McCann and all that stuff, but no one was really hitting. And then all of a sudden, I think it was that 8th inning, I should say, because it was a 7-inning game, but the extra inning game where they came back and won, Pete Alonso had a big sac fly, and then Jonathan Villar ended up winning the game. That just seemed to get them going. And talk about Brandon Nimmo getting on base basically every single time. Francisco Lindor started in the slump, but it looks like he's going to come around. I'm not really worried about him. But I mean, right now, like if the Mets bats, if they can hit to where they were, I mean, Sam, we'll start with you this time. Like, where do you think this team's now ceiling is if they can get everything going? I mean, the bullpen, that's something else. I think we're going to have to get into that. But if they can get, like, I think they're on the upward trend with the hitting, and you have the starting pitching being really solid. Where do you think this team can end up here?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I don't think like this hitting doesn't have to be tremendous. They have to be good enough, because we just talked about how good the starting pitching is, and obviously they're waiting to get guys back there. So that's my thought process with this hitting is that, I mean, sure, they've been struggling a lot lately. You look at a guy like Conforto, and obviously in a very big slump, and that's a huge issue. And then even Lindor and Alonso, like you said, Alonso seemed to, big sac fly there. That was important. I expect Alonso and Lindor to get going. I don't expect them to have a bad season. I think those two guys are incredibly talented hitters, both of them. Those are the guys in the lineup that really need to get going, but I don't think it's a huge pressure. I think they definitely will. Conforto seems to be in a big time slump, which is why I'm a little bit less optimistic with him. I think eventually guys get out of those, but in baseball, I mean, a slump is so difficult, and chances are it's, almost 90% mental, it seems like, and very little physical there. So that's a big issue with this lineup here. But like I said, I think just talking about this Mets team, it comes down to the fact that they don't have to be great. This lineup does, we're going to talk about the Yankees in a little while. I think their lineup has a ton of pressure on them because of the starting pitching and how not so good that is, how shaky that's been. Their lineup has to be tremendous. But for the Mets, their lineup needs to be good, obviously. If you're gonna win the division or go into a wild card, you have to be good. But you don't have to be great. That lineup doesn't have to be perfect. I expect Lindor and I expect Alonso to get going. Those are two big pieces for them. Nimmo has been very good. That's certainly a positive for this team. I think this lineup will be good enough. I'm not too worried about them. I'm relatively optimistic just because of how you can fall back on that starting pitching, especially come October, because you mentioned that too. I think the bullpen is big in October, and that's obviously this team's biggest concern. We'll get into that. But starting pitching is also very huge. And if you can have these guys going really late in games, that can make up for kind of a shaky bullpen, I feel like. And I'm just thinking about maybe a potential wild card matchup, Mets Padres, just looking down way down the road. Obviously, it's super early, but that's, I feel like, a matchup everybody is super excited about and would love to see. DeGrom in a 1-game wild card against the Padres, against anyone, you got to like the Mets' chances. So for me, that's just like, I think this lineup will be good enough in terms of offensively, but it all comes down to that starting pitching, and that's going to be the make or break.
Yeah, a lot there. I do agree. I think Padres Mets, I do think we will probably see that. I know it's a big foreshadow looking in the future, but
Huge.
One thing that I do think also, I agree with your point. The lineup just has to be fine, right? You bring in Lindor, he will get going. Pete will get going. It's funny because, the second half of the offseason was all about getting a center fielder, and Brandon Nimmo has been the best hitter on this team, above 400, getting on base every other time. So that's been kind of a fun thing. We'll see if he keeps that up. But the one thing that I don't really agree with is how the bullpen is everything for this team, because you talked about how starters can cover up, a shaky bullpen, but you can have, as DeGrom knows, you can have an amazing start and then it just all unravels once you get taken out of the game. The bullpen is what you need to cover up, bad starting pitching if you have to yank guys early. And especially come playoff time, you need bullpens. You need to go to guys early. You need guys to get outs. And I think the bullpen is the big question mark with this team, because rotation's going to be there. The lineup will do enough. But Seth Lugo, probably their most consistent guy out right now. Trevor May, shaky start to him opening day. He kind of blew that game. Betances is kind of fallen out of favor a little bit. He's kind of a non-factor now. And Edwin Diaz, we know him. He has all the stuff in the world, but he's up and down at times. So I do think this bullpen is going to need to get reinforcements. And I do think at the end of the day, it will come down to that and how Rojas manages it, because I think that plays a big role. We've seen in the playoffs, we'll go to the Yankees in a second, but there have been mismanagements of the bullpen, and it's cost them momentum. It's costed them series. So I do think the Mets will need to add there if we're talking, big picture. Like if they want to make some real noise, it won't be with this bullpen. But as of right now, I think this Mets team is solid. They're doing enough right now. As you talked about, if you can kind of stay afloat right now, you wait for the reinforcements to come back, it could be scary and they could totally win the East. It is a stacked division, as you talked about. The Braves haven't really got going. I expect them to pick it up, but the Mets have the talent to match the Braves, I think, with that rotation. There's no reason that they would be significantly worse. So stay afloat for now. You'll get the pieces back, add to the bullpen, and I think the Mets will be fine.
Yeah, but bullpen's the big thing. And I think right now, they got to wait till Seth Lugo, and then it'll be interesting to see, if he's coming back full healthy. I think then like they're a middle of the line bullpen. They probably still have to add someone late in there. I think Trevor May, he's been the guy that's been a little disappointing. I think Diaz, I think he's pitched well. I think he had one really bad outing where he came in after DeGrom, but they were already losing. So I'm not going to put that much stock into that. Didn't play blow a game. And his stuff is just so good. He's got the new pitch-in song, the walk-up song that I just love.
You love
and
that.
It gets me pumped up. And ever since he's had that song since last year, it's just I'm confident that he's going to get out. I don't know why I have that just extra, like he's going to do it. And I'm an Edwin Diaz guy. I'll say it now. He's a good pitcher. His stuff is good, and all the home run stuff, like that'll even out, I think, over time. And he was good with Seattle, and then he had the walk-up song there. Then he came to New York, and they didn't allow him to have it, or whatever happened. He changed it, then wasn't good. Last year he brings it back, and he was dominant, sub-2 ERA. So I'm just saying, there's probably something there. And I think he'll be this team's closer, and I think Lugo will end up being like the 2-inning guy. And May, I thought he was going to be that third guy who can pitch big innings, and his stuff just hasn't looked as electric as it was with, I believe, was the Twins. And he's a guy that, look, it's so early in the season, but when your stuff doesn't look good, that worries me. And some of his off speed pitches have looked flat, and you have some issues there. So like that really concerns me. And then Miguel Castro, he's kind of the other guy who's, a big leverage reliever, and he scares me. Really good stuff, kind of like Diaz light, I like to call him. I think he has really good stuff, gives up home runs, but again, he's kind of, I think, a little wild. Then you have Familia, who's, again, just a complete wild card. But I think this bullpen's interesting as, if they can get to when Lugo's back. Like right now, you're kind of worried because I don't really have trust in anyone besides Edwin Diaz. And that's just for someone who likes Edwin Diaz. So, a lot of Mets fans have trust in nobody. And like, that's tough after you're coming from like a DeGrom 7-inning shutout. And then you go from 100% trust to 0 trust. And like, that's tough. And I bet the opposing hitters are like, okay, we have DeGrom out, we have Stroman out, now we can go hit these guys. That's something that scares me. And losing bullpen games are also like when you have the lead, bullpen blows it. Those are the worst losses too. So those are the stuff that scares me really first for the Mets. And it's scared me since they didn't really add that much in the offseason, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point there about opposing hitters, especially when a guy like DeGrom or even honestly anyone in this rotation right now, because of how well they're throwing, comes out of the game. It's a huge mental boost, I feel like, for an opposing lineup to think, okay, we know this Mets bullpen doesn't have it. We know that we can get to these guys, no matter how good their stuff is. I think baseball is, it's an extremely mental sport. You hear that a lot, but these opposing hitters must be kind of licking their chops when they see even Edwin Diaz come into the game, who's, like you said, he's got great stuff and he's pitched very well. He's been dominant at times. And I think that's why kind of fans have been so frustrated with Diaz when he struggles, just because I think Mets fans know how good he can be and how important he can be for this bullpen, which he could very well be the dominant arm in that bullpen, the most reliable arm, because he has the stuff to be. But whether he will be, obviously, is a question. We'll see. Maybe that new walk-up song will help. But I think Trevor May is another guy who I would agree with you, Andrew, has been disappointing, because I think the Mets definitely expected a lot bringing him into a bullpen that they knew wasn't great. And then they kind of needed him to step up, especially when Seth Lugo's been hurt. So that's a piece that I think has really been uncertain and kind of difficult for this Mets bullpen. But Lugo getting back, if Edwin Diaz can kind of figure things out, maybe you get a guy come trade deadline time. I think that would be huge for this Mets bullpen as well. They can piece it together, but unfortunately, I think if you're a Mets fan, you're always going to be worried about this bullpen, no matter what they do. Come playoff time, if the Mets make it, which I'm sure they will, they'll find a way to get in. That bullpen, I think, is just going to be something that they're going to be concerned about, no matter who they get come trade deadline time. But I do expect them to get somebody. And Edwin Diaz can certainly turn into that kind of closer role. And if both those things happen, I think the Mets are in really good shape to certainly, I'd say, make a run here and down the road in October come playoff time.
Yeah, now I want to move over to a team that has a much better bullpen, but now other issues, and that's the Yankees. And, it's kind of funny you talk about these two teams with the differences and, what they're good at, what they're bad at. But the Yankees, I think that's the only thing that's really going right for them right now is this bullpen. Talk about fifth in the AL, worst team, in the whole, AL right now. And that's something that is tough for a team that was supposed to be at the top. 5-8 starts. So obviously only 3 games under. They definitely have a lot of time to come back, but it's been just tough because of the way they've lost ways. And I feel like every way imaginable. You have the new rules kind of screwing them over with the 7 innings. You had the extra innings where the runner on second had, early on, the starting pitching hasn't been good. Really, it's only been Cole. Kind of reminds me of the Mets last year where you had DeGrom and nothing behind him. Now you have Cole and nothing behind them. So, I mean, those are kind of the biggest worries. And I think, the hitting's also been inconsistent. The big stat for me is they already have over 100 Ks in 13 games. That's something that, when you leave runners on base and you need to have some clutch hits, over 100 Ks is just not going to cut it. And, those are the things I think for the Yankees, like the hitting, I think will turn it around. That's why I want to start with the starting pitching, because that's been the worry, not only just this year, not only just this offseason, it's really been it forever. I feel like when the Yankees have had this run here and it seems like it's after Cole, it's continuing to, kind of falter right now. So Ryan, resident Yankee fan, want to start off with you. I want to take your temperature right now. How are you feeling about this Yankees team here in the first 13 games?
Yeah, I'm hot. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm pretty hot here. Before I kind of go into, how bad the rotation's been, I do think if we're going to talk about how good Taijuan Walker has been through too, I think Jordan Montgomery, he has been the one guy behind Cole who has looked comparable. And he had some big starts. He had a big one versus the Blue Jays in a game they had to win. But you talked about this year, the 7th inning stuff. And I feel like, we're 10 games into the year. And there's already been 3 games where I've been like, that's the worst loss of the year. That's the worst loss of the year. And they keep coming. And, it's the way they're losing these games, as you talked about, because the hitting has not been there. And that is always frustrating, when you see your team not hitting. But that is something that I think we all expect to turn it around, right? This lineup has as much talent as anyone in baseball. Aaron Judge has been killing it. And besides that, it's been kind of slow. So I do think that will turn around 100%. Not too worried there. And then, where I get hot and where I get nervous for this team long-term is the rotation, because they made the decision this offseason that instead of, for whatever reason, they had to get under the luxury tax. It's the state of the game. That's a whole nother conversation. And they had about $15 million to spend. And, they could have got a guy like Tanaka back. Obviously, they went the route of going 2 for 1. And normally I would be all for that because depth is so important, especially during a whole 162 game season. You're going to have injuries. But the guys they brought in, it was Kluber and Tyone. And so Kluber was always a flyer because obviously he pitched 1 inning last year. He's been up and down the last few years, but there was real optimism that he would turn around. In spring, he looked great. Eric Cressy, who is now in the Yankees health department, has been with Kluber forever. He's trained with him in the offseason. So there was a connection there, and there was trust that he could get Kluber back to what he was. And I know it's only 2 starts, and obviously things can change, but a guy like Kluber, you needed him to pitch well out of the gate because, there's expectation. I think we talked about this in the pre-show. You thought he'd come out, he'd pitch well, he'd kind of tail off at the end of the year as the age and the innings get up to him, but he just hasn't looked good at all so far. He hasn't got past the 4th inning, 6.1 ERA in 3 starts, got rocked his last time out. And that really is concerning because the Yankees were trusting 2 guys in him and Tyone, who pitched a combined 1 inning last year, to make up a bulk of this rotation. And Tyone, I don't want to kill yet because I think, he's coming off from Tommy John. It's only 2 starts. And one of them, he really made 2 bad pitches the whole game. So I do think it's too early to kind of, flip out on him. But Kluber has been a big concern. I watch him and I'm just not impressed with the stuff he's had. So, at the end of the day, we know Cole is going to dominate, right? I think weirdly enough, he's still chasing that Cy Young. I think he's looking at a strong case this year, 1.47 ERA through 3 starts. But the Yankees need more than that. If a guy like Montgomery is going to step up, you need some of these guys you brought in to be that number 2 to do it. So Kluber, Tyone, they're going to need them to work out. Herman has already been sent down, so that experiment pretty much already failed, which is concerning. And so, yeah, the state of the Yankees, it's early. I'm not too happy. I'm not crazy worried. But this rotation, as we talk about the Yankees, your expectations are to win a championship. It's championship or bust. And I get that. And, it should be the case when you're spending the money you are. And right now, I don't feel great about that with this rotation. You're going to need more. Obviously, I don't want to start speculating for the deadline, but I would be shocked if they go into the playoffs, if they can make the playoffs with this rotation, because it's not where it needs to be right now. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, a guy you didn't mention, I think, is Severino, and he could be a big option for this rotation. But my point, I guess, starting at the top with Garrett Cole, I started with DeGrom for the Mets, so looking at some sort of optimism here for the Yankees. Garrett Cole is it right now. He's your optimism. Every time he takes the mound, you feel like you have a good chance to win if you're a Yankees fan, if you're a Yankees player. And that's huge. That's awesome to have an ace like that. Definitely a Cy Young contender. I think he's got a good chance to take that in the American League. But then you have certainly a lot of question marks outside of it. Ryan, you talked about Kluber and Tyone. Those are big ones. Those are guys that, from taking them in this offseason, I was certainly critical just because of the fact that neither of them have pitched a lot. Kluber, obviously, kind of up there in age. And I think Andrew, Ryan, you mentioned, made a great point just about how Kluber, you expected him to start well and then kind of ease off. And the fact that he's not playing well right now off the jump is, I would say, extremely concerning for this staff, because my thought process is between Tyone and Kluber, I would say you kind of need one of them to work out at least. Obviously both would be nice, but I'd say you could take maybe Tyone working out or maybe Kluber working out, although that seems unlikely. But let's say Tyone finds it, figures it out. He could be like a number 3 guy behind Cole. And then you said Montgomery, he's very consistent, very reliable. And then Severino, you can throw him into the mix. Hopefully, as a Yankees fan, you got to hope that when he comes back, he's going to be reliable and he's going to be at least somewhat like his older self, although you can't exactly expect him to be exactly like he used to be. But for me, that's just, when I'm saying all this, I can't even I don't know. I feel like I can't convince anyone with that. It's just a ton of question marks surrounding this entire staff. And that's why I think, I hope for Yankees fans that they do go out and get somebody at the deadline, because that's going to definitely help this rotation. They need it. Just like we talked about the Mets bullpen. The Yankees, I don't think they can go into the playoffs with the rotation looking like it is right now. Severino could come up, step up. Montgomery will be good and Cole will be good, but you need another guy there. It could be Tyone, but I think certainly you could look towards the trade deadline and find somebody there. I'm sure there's someone available down the road for the Yankees to go and get. And I think Cashman might go and get that arm that they kind of need, because for me, I mentioned this when we were talking about the Mets, this lineup just has a ton of pressure on it to really produce. And I think, I think there's no question about it that this lineup will turn things around. I mean, it's way too early. And some of these guys certainly have been underperforming, to say the least. I mean, Brett Gardner, it should not be your everyday center fielder or left fielder in this lineup. No offense to Brett Gardner, but you have guys like Aaron Hicks that haven't been hitting. I mean, Aaron Judge hitting, that's big. It's nice to have him back. I mean, Stanton hasn't been hitting. Gleyber Torres has been struggling. I mean, you could just go down the list. So basically this entire depth chart and point a couple guys that you think, okay, these guys have been playing very well offensively. So for me, I don't worry about that too much, but I think early on it might just be a sign of the fact that there's a lot of pressure around this lineup to produce a lot, especially when this starting rotation just doesn't seem to have it.
This rotation for the Yankees, I've seen this movie before, and it was just last year with the Mets, because you had Zach Wheeler, great pitcher, just like Tanaka, reliable. I don't think they're an ace, but I think they're a solid number 2, solid number 3. And they leave, and then you replace them with a Rick Porcello and a Michael Wacha. And Rick Porcello was your veteran in there, won a Cy Young, and it blew up in the Mets' faces. Michael Wacha got hurt, and he had some success with the Cardinals, had some solid years. Same with Tyone, and then it just blew up in their face. They didn't even have a Montgomery, so maybe the Yankees are even better than that, but I mean, who knows? I mean, it's only been 3 starts for him. You said it's only been a few starts for Tyone. You could say the same for Montgomery, who, again, I think it's a good story. So I think he's looked really good, but I wouldn't say he's like the full, solidifying there as a number 2 starter. And you look at beyond that, you really got nothing right now. And Severino, you don't know how he's going to come back. I've seen waiting for pitchers. You could be waiting forever for this guy to come back and pitch well. And that's just stuff that it really concerns you, because you're going to need someone beyond Cole in the playoffs. And when you face teams, I mean, you talk about like a team like the Mets, or I know they're in the National League, but still. And I think a team in the AL, I think it's wide open. I think someone's going to add at the deadline, and they're going to probably get a big ace. And, hopefully for the Yankees' sake, it's them. And they really now they have like a Cole and another ace. And maybe that's what Cashman was thinking all along, because really besides Bauer, and even Bauer, he's a question mark in his own right, but there wasn't like a ace out there to get. There wasn't a Garrett Cole out there to get. So maybe he's like, let me wait until the deadline where we already see, maybe you could pick up a hot pitcher. Like the Astros did that with Verlander when he was available, and they were able to get him, and that propelled them, to a deep playoff runs, multiple deep playoff runs. And, I feel like that's what the Yankees will probably have to do right now. And it's just like, I didn't like the move for Kluber and Tyone when it happened. And, early on, I still don't like it. And that's something that for Yankees fans, and I am holding them to a high bar, because they're the New York Yankees. And I expect the New York Yankees not to take flyers. I expect them to get the big guys. And, whether that be through trades or, free agency, that's the one thing that, worried me, that they were looking like the Wilpons out there getting, a guy like Kluber and not getting the Bauer or whoever it may be, the Carrasco's out there that, the Mets were interested in. But that's just kind of my 2 cents on, this Yankees rotation. And you go to the hitting, I think the hitting will come around, just because you have a lot of home run hitters. They're going to start hitting home runs. You talk about, you still have LeMahieu, Urshela, all those guys. I think they'll start, ends up hitting. I'm not too worried about that, just because you have a ton of talent there. In this rotation, you don't have a lot of talent. That's, I think, the most worrisome thing. I mean, and that's where I think, this Yankees team kind of plays out. That's why I think they'll probably still win the division. It's just when you look to the playoffs, when you need a pitcher beyond, Garrett Cole, it'll be interesting to see, if they can go get that guy now in the trade deadline, and that may define their season.
Yeah. Sorry, Ryan, I just wanted to hop in real quick on what Andrew is saying there. I think I totally agree with you that coming into this season, the primary explanation of getting Tyone and Kluber was, the American League is not as good as it used to be. And to me, that's just almost setting you up for failure. I mean, this Yankees team, I think a lot of people are very hard on them. And I would say I would include myself as someone that's very hard on this team. But that's just because we all know the potential that this team has. We all know that this team the goal should be getting to the World Series. I mean, that's been a goal for, I'd say, at least a couple years, if not more. It seems like it's always a goal for this Yankees organization, is to make a deep playoff run. But especially now, there seems to be just a sense of urgency where it's like, okay, we have to find a way to get to the World Series. Or it seems like, I don't know, maybe they make some changes in that managerial position there. But that's why I think these moves, just for me, seems so lackluster because the Yankees and their thought process should be getting to the World Series. That should be a goal for the team this year.
Yeah, just something, you talked about how I didn't bring up Severino earlier, and that's because with the last few years, it's been like the saying has been, oh, we get this guy back from injury, that's our deadline acquisition. I didn't bring that up because I think that's unacceptable because you don't know with Tommy John. It is a process. This could be pushed back forever. You have Clark Schmidt right now also, who was supposed to make this rotation. He's been dealing with arm issues all year. He's supposed to be back by opening day. He may not come back all year. You just don't know. I think they have to be aggressive. We've seen in the past, Cashman has not been willing to give up the prospects. He just hasn't, for whatever reason. Obviously, a lot of them have came up and hit, and that's been great. But at some point, you're going to have to go all in, every chip in the table. Not saying they're not doing that, but I think that's why, we are so hard on them right now. Is because of how all in they are. You expect them to get to a World Series. It's year 4, I think, where, Brian Cashman called this team, Operation Death Star, where he traded for Stan and the expectations were sky high and they still have not lived up to them. So I do think you're going to have to do something there. I don't think this team right now, as constructed, is a World Series team at all. Not a chance. We've seen the situational hitting has to improve. The lineup has to improve. The starting rotation has to improve. The bullpen, though, I will say, just to go a little positive here, because it hasn't been all bad. And they are, kind of a few lucky breaks away. You could flip. Some of these losses they could have easily won, right? So, but that's baseball. But so the bullpen has been dominant. I do want to shout out there because they did take some flyers there. We talk about the 2-for-1 trade, kind of basically Tanaka for 2 proven guys. They did that with Ottavino. They shipped him to the Red Sox and they're able to sign O'Day for Wilson for the price of 1. And those 2 have looked great so far. So I'm not concerned there. And that is why I do think the Yankees will be fine in the end. And obviously, last place right now, whatever, it's so early. I don't think that is, what this team's going to be. They're going to start winning games. I'm not concerned about that. They've won regular season games with worse rotations. Before they got Cole, I remember in 19 and 18, they had months where they had 1 starter and then they just piece it together with bullpen guys and they figured out because the lineup is that good. Yeah. And as you talked about, Sam, you put so much pressure on them at some point, maybe the balloon's going to pop here. So it is a concern. I'm looking to that. And I do think they need to get better, but it is early. So I'm hot, but I'm not all the way there. The stress and the worry isn't 10 on the 1 to 10 scale just yet.
No, yeah. I mean, you talk about the bullpen and like that 2-for-1. It works, I think, because like Wilson, he's a known commodity. Like he was on the Mets last year. He was great. Like, I mean, I wish the Mets re-signed him and then the Yankees poached him away. But I mean, yeah, this bullpen has looked really good and they're going to win games. Like, I just think the bullpen's too good. The hitting is too good that, as you said, like they've had worse rotations in the past. It's just like the playoffs and like you hold the Yankees to that standard because they've been World Series or bust for a while. And it's just, at a certain point you have to break through the door or the balloon will pop. People will get fired. And I mean, that's, I think, going to be the interesting thing to say, where does Cashman or a Boone say, okay, my job's on the line. Let me get this trade so we can win a World Series. And that may be the breaking point needed for this Yankees team. But I think that's going to wrap up our Mets and Yankees conversation. A lot to talk about. I mean, obviously, with the Yankees not starting off well, the Mets with all their new expectations with Steve Cohen. Next, Sam, you're going to join us to talk about headlines around the MLB. But first, we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Sam Davis here with your headlines. Another round of issues off the field for the Mets organization, as on Friday, a report from The Athletic had allegations against David Newman, Mets marketing officer who was actually rehired by Sandy Alderson last season. Also, many Mets employees claim that Holly Lindvall, who's the Mets VP of Human Resources, was aware of complaints of harassment, but did not take action on those complaints in order to please management under the Wilpons at that time, of course. The current Mets owner, Steve Cohen, responded by hiring a law firm to review the organization's culture, is what they will do. Just a lot in this story, a lot in this report, but Andrew, I'm going to go to you first here. What's your thoughts on another Mets organizational issue?
It shows that the Wilpons, they're the worst owners of all time. And I don't think anyone thought it was like this bad, but it's not only like the turmoil in the public eye, it was turmoil behind the scenes. And that's something that's really disheartening, that it was even, you got to the sexual harassment and the Wilpons wanted to cover their behinds like they do on the field. They wanted to do it off the field as well, not listening to their employees. And like for me, Steve Cohen, I wonder what he knew what he was getting into, with all these behind the scenes scandals, which, for him, he's dealt with them in his past issues, in the finance world and all that stuff. But, he is hiring that, the outside, firm to review the organization's culture. And to me, the interesting point with this is, where does Sandy Alderson, where does he fit into this? Because he was now with the Wilpons and now is with the, with Cohen. And for me, I think the always thing between Mets fans is like, is he, an extension of the Wilpons? Is he still like, was he in with the Wilpons, or was he not one of them? And was he just there because he was a good baseball mind and they were trying to win a World Series and, try to change a franchise, and he really wasn't with them, and Sandy was being held back by the Wilpons. And you don't really know which way it is. And I think until this, organization culture review comes back and we'll see what the results are of it, I think that's when you can make a decision on Sandy Alderson. Because even in like the article, he had some questionable things that he was saying about it, which that I think raises eyebrows even more to like, is he, in that Wilpons frame of mind, or was he being held back by them in other ways than just baseball, culture-wise as well? And that's, I think, the biggest thing, because it's just going to be very interesting to see how Steve Cohen can just transition from just such a badly run franchise in every way with the Wilpons to now trying to become, as he says, like a sustainable organization, looking to win not only on the field, but off the field as well. And that's going to be something, I trust Uncle Stevie, but this is going to be difficult for him. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's one thing to be like a bad owner and that you're cheap and everything else that came with the Wilpons, but like for stuff like this, it's just really unacceptable. And it's scary too. You had Newman, you rehire him and you had people say like, please don't rehire him. He was a creep. He did all these things and you still do it. And I think at that point you have to evaluate the culture completely. I don't know if this, lawyer, this firm or whatever is going to do its justice. I think you need to evaluate. And if that's what it is, that's what you do, because there are a ton of problems with this organization. And, this is like, they hired Jared Porter a few months ago. So it's not like, Steve Cohen, obviously he didn't know anything, but, he is getting himself into a tricky situation. someone in the Athletic article, they were quoting, different Mets people in the organization. They said, we were all pawns in this toxic workplace. So clearly when, the behind the scenes and off the field stuff is toxic and the on field stuff is toxic, it's not going to make for winning baseball. And so Cohen has to make sure, though, before winning baseball, that the people that work for him are safe and they feel comfortable at their workplace, because that's what you need. You can't have people, on their edge and worried about some boss who is going to go too far and be inappropriate, because at that point you can't do it. Stanley Alderson, I think you make a good point. You have to take a look in the mirror and see what he knew. Was he with the Wilpons for the baseball? Was he in with them on all this kind of stuff? And I think that is important and something you do have to really take a hard look at, because you have to make sure for this investigation, for the culture to change, that he wasn't. And if he was, you have to let him go. And you have to make sure you do that before you move on, because it'll be tough if, you're going to your boss, begging not to hire someone and they still do it. So I do think this was concerning to see. I hope that, the people that felt uncomfortable, they're okay now and stuff like that. And you never want to see it. And it was another ugly mark on the Wilpon era for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you certainly brought up a good point here with all of it. I mean, this Mets organization, I think this issue obviously it started with Jared Porter. And to me, I think this move by Cohen, I do like deciding to have a law firm sort of, look at the organizational culture, because I think that's important. But I think this could have been done, honestly, right after that Jared Porter incident, because I think that Porter incident, the fact that the Mets went out and hired him, despite the fact that his past was there. I mean, obviously they didn't know anything about it, but just a view of the, I guess a character, a view of the character when you're conducting these interviews, I think is a really important part of an organization. And that just showed that they failed in that instance. So I think from that first moment on, you kind of had to really take a look at this organization, and see where the problems are, because you can't have a successful organization, and you shouldn't have a successful organization when you have employees that are uncomfortable, that are feeling like their needs aren't met in terms of obviously complaint. And that's terrible. I mean, that's the worst part of it. Just seems to be like almost the nail in the coffin here, because it's even worse when people are asking and people are complaining about these serious issues, and it's being ignored. I mean, that can't happen. That cannot happen in any organization. I think you really need to take a look at not only this Mets organization, but I would just say baseball in general here, and look at every organization and see where these issues are coming up, because they seem to keep coming up with the Mets organization. And it's hard to believe that the Mets are the only organization where something like this could be happening. Yeah. It's certainly not. And I think that's why you really need, as Major League Baseball as a whole, you really need to hold yourself accountable. You really need to, I would say, look at the organizational culture of really every team. It's not just the Mets, but certainly the Mets have some problems to deal with. And I think coming back to that, the Wilpons, obviously, that's certainly an issue. Cohen has this team, I think, in a lot better spot. Unfortunately, he's inherited a really tough situation off the field that I don't think he ever could have imagined getting into. I hope he didn't imagine getting into that. And I'm sure he didn't. And I'm glad he made the decision to, review this organization and then take the proper steps. But to be honest, from the moments of that Jared Porter issue, I think they should have done it immediately.
In fairness with Steve Cohen, I think he started it, because I think it obviously takes a while. It doesn't happen overnight. I think he started it after the Callaway thing when that came out. I think it was around that time. So I think it was a little before this one. And again, I feel like it's just something that I think it's smart to do, because you have to see, like, I mean, especially coming in as an outsider, you don't really know, I guess, what you're getting into until, you don't know the people, you don't know the relationships. And this is basically the best way to find out the severity of it. And you probably should do it throughout baseball. So maybe this is a pretty good idea to see how that, works out. But it just shows you just the Wilpons. I mean, it wasn't just bad, on the field. And I don't know how it got to such a point, I guess, where they just had to sell. And, I guess that's good for everybody involved. And hopefully Steve Cohen, he's the answer on the field and also off the field for these employees. And he's talked about it. So it's not like he's just worried about on the field stuff. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see, where, they go and how this all works out. And I think Sandy Alderson, it's going to be interesting to see what that report says and what Steve Cohen does from there, because it's kind of this, they brought him in. And I think a lot of Mets fans thought it was weird because he was part of the old, Wilpons for like a pretty long time. And I know they had a bad falling out, Alderson and the Wilpons, because just the way Alderson left the organization when he was diagnosed with cancer, and they kind of fired him after that, which is, another kind of awful thing that the Wilpons did. But, you don't know like where he was with them and like how in cahoots he was with them. And I think that's something that you have to find out, or, if he was part of that bad culture, you got to let him go and you got to kind of move on from there, which, if that would happen, that's like for the Mets, someone leading the organization, Jared Porter, then you now Sandy Alderson, that's something that if you're Steve Cohen, you have to take a look in the mirror, like, who are we hiring here? And that's, to me, what I'm getting out of this right now.
Yeah, you just said, sorry, I just have a quick thing. You were like, oh, he started it during the Callaway, or it was the other one or something. The fact that there are, all these different allegations, and you have to remember which the investigation started with is its own thing. There should be zero. There should be none. And it is concerning. It's been a tough kind of 5 months, where we found out Porter, Callaway, and now this, it is really concerning. And you hope that the new ownership with Steve Cohen can right the wrongs of the Wilpons, because there are so many wrongs that they do have to right. And it's a tough task and it is unfair. But at the same time, you're an owner of an organization, you have employees, you need to make sure that they are comfortable in their work environment. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I will say that this Mets organization seems to be in a lot better spot, obviously, with Steve Cohen. I mean, there's no doubt behind that. And that's something, I guess, positive you could kind of take from this. I think you can trust that he's going to do what needs to be done to help this organization. And I think Major League Baseball really needs to step up and address this issue from a league-wide situation, not just from the Mets organization, but every other organization as well, because it's an issue that, like you said, Ryan, it shouldn't be happening at all. So the fact that it is certainly an issue. From kind of bad organizations off the field to some bad calls on the field here. To start the 2021 MLB season, we have seen a lot of not so great replays and the replay review system here in Major League Baseball. I mean, we saw the Phillies Braves game, we saw the Red Sox Twins, we saw the Mets Marlins. There's countless other examples of teams going to review, and just, I guess, the replay system in general here in Major League Baseball has just been a serious issue. So, Ryan, I'm gonna go to you here. What's wrong with this replay system, and do you think there can be things that could be done to improve it?
Yeah, I have a few, but it's just also weird to think about. Like, at the same time, the really solution just be get better. Like, they just have to get better at reviewing. But you're seeing games decided on missed calls, and that's one thing. But then when you review the missed call and you keep it, you uphold it, it is really like, what's the point here? We're going to waste this time and we're not even going to get the call right. Why even have replay? I do think it's necessary for the game. I'm glad that, it's kind of Bud Selig's last kind of move was to enact replay. And I do think it's good overall. But one thing I think you need is transparency, whether that's with the the head umpire mic'd up or something like that. Maybe you bring in someone in the booth or something like that. You need some kind of transparency. You need to know what their thought process is. I've seen some other kind of suggestions where you have the people reviewing it not know the call on the field, which I don't know if that works, but I think that's interesting. Maybe you could try it at the lower levels or something, because I see a lot of times it's too close and they'll just keep the call. But if you don't know what the call is, that would change your interpretation. For me, I know a lot of people complain about the time, but my thought is always, if they're getting it right, I don't care. I'm not a pace of play guy, but I know that is an issue. But if they're not getting it right, I absolutely care. If you're going to, ruin the rhythm of the game and you're not even going to get it right, why do it? So I do think they have to look at this review process. They need to shore it up. They need to get better at the end of the day, because, it is concerning, and it's not a great part of baseball how you're having games lost that should be won, and you're having missed calls all over the place, and replay should be getting rid of that element. And it's not so far. So I do think you need to change it. And I don't know of a perfect answer, but I do think the transparency is something that we'd all appreciate as fans.
To me, I think, like, as you said, and there's two things I want to echo. First of all, the accuracy. Like, why? I feel like MLB is the one league where they get calls wrong, like, more than any other NFL or NBA. And, like, I don't understand why that's the case. Like, and that's like, that's what you have replay. And I don't know if that's just because the umpires maybe aren't trained better. I don't really know the situation. It just makes no sense. I mean, I don't understand why, like, I think it was Alex Bone being called safe at home plate. I mean, I can tell it, and I'm not a trained umpire. So why are they? It's just, to me, it makes, like, those calls just, to me, is like, you just roll your eyes. And then I don't know why umps aren't mic'd up. Like, why isn't that the case? They are in football. It works out perfectly. We all know the call. And yeah, sometimes you look at those refs and sometimes their calls are a little roundabout and they don't make a lot of sense, but at least you kind of hear their thought process. In the MLB, they just go, they point and they say safe, and that's it. And then it's like, or point out, okay. And then it's just like, you don't know why. And sometimes even like I was watching the Mets game and it was like on a double play and they were reviewing it, and no one knew if they were reviewing if he was touching second base or if the slide went too wrong. So no one even knows what you're reviewing either, which, to me, obviously the teams know, but as a fan, you would like to know that. So it's like those kind of things is something that, I would try to fix. And just like one more thing would be like, I don't like how, you're supposed to have 2 challenges or 1 challenge. And if you get the second one, if you get it right, you get the second one. And I don't love that. Like you get to a certain point in the game, the team just asks for a review and they get it automatically, and then, which is, you kind of makes sense, but like why you have the rule in place then is basically just unlimited challenges. So to me, it's just like wonky, and there are a few things that have to get worked out. And like when you have a replay system and blatant calls are not being changed, is really the biggest problem here. And, from there, I guess these are little things that I'm talking about, but I think they can help the overall process.
Yeah, you guys both mentioned it. It's outrageous to get calls wrong when you go to replay. Just simply get very easy calls ones wrong. And I think, I don't see that being an issue going forward. I assume that, I don't know, maybe they'll train umps better, but they'll just decide to make the right calls. This isn't a problem in any other league, like you said, Andrew. So I don't know if that'll be an issue. But I think it does help us look at the replay system in general and make improvements. And I think microphones on the umpires is a huge one, because if you're in the stands or if you're watching the game on the TV, you are basically have no idea, and you leave the commentators up to just speculate about what's going on, what they're even reviewing in some instances. And that's just not good. That's just going to make for some issues already off the bat. If the umpires are making wrong calls, but are at least transparent about it, it's a little bit better, because you at least understand what's going on at the very least. And I guess maybe we need to work on getting umpires that can make the right calls. But at the very least, at least talking through it, talking to the audience with the microphone is huge. And I read something else. I'm not going to take credit for this. But I saw someone write about an idea for putting earpieces in the umpires instead of having to run all the way over to the dugout to put those big headphones on. And that takes it seems like it takes an eternity with these umpires running over there and back. Putting a little earpiece on, so it makes it a lot more simple. They can go to New York very, very quickly. They can get the call very quickly, and they don't even have to leave their spot. They can make the call right away. And I know, Ryan, you said you aren't a big pace of play person, but I am, to be honest. And for me, you mentioned it, Andrew, too, limiting some of these replay opportunities, or if you're going to limit it, you might as well limit it stricter than it is now. I feel like some of these calls, I will say, in like the 3rd inning where the guy's foot is a millimeter off second base in a double play in April, I get very frustrated. I don't think that's the reason we chose to do replay. I don't think that's the reason we need replay. I don't know how you can kind of get around that. I guess that's kind of an issue that once you have replay, you're going to use it for those instances. I just don't like that. I find that frustrating. Maybe regular season, you can limit challenges towards later in the game when the call is a lot more important. Come playoff time, I don't think there should be as strong of a limit, just because it's a very important game. Every game is. So you need to get the call right. That's the bottom line. But in April, in May, early in the season, I think there should be some sort of limit on these challenges, a lot stronger than it is, just to kind of avoid the dull kind of sitting there waiting while these guys hear from New York and try and get the call. And then sometimes they don't even get it right. So, bottom line, I think a lot needs to be done with this replay system. And it makes me think almost of a better way, of a future of maybe robo umpires. Everybody's had this conversation. I like it. I think it makes sense, but obviously that's a conversation. I guess we could talk about that forever. That maybe that's a conversation for another time, but certainly a lot needs to be done about this replay system for sure.
Yeah, I just love talking baseball. I gotta say that's the one thing we talked about it through, this first hour here, and had a lot of fun. But that'll wrap up our conversation here, our headlines. Thank you, Sam, with our MLB news. Next, me and Ryan, we're going to take a look at the NBA, Knicks, Nets, all that fun stuff. But first, we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Back here on One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Ryan Gregware, and now we're going to get to the association here with the NBA. Locally here, Knicks and Nets. It's been just such a fun season, just, really going through these one-on-ones, talking about the Knicks and Nets every week, as we've really had a treat. You got the Nets as one of the best teams in the NBA, the Knicks are this up-and-coming team that's really fun to watch, and that's a team I do want to start off with because they're in the headlines for the right reasons finally this season. And now they are again with 5 straight wins, their longest streak of the season, their longest streak since 2014. So they've definitely been, surprising everybody. And, 3 games over 500. I mean, going into last night, they were 6th in the East. So, they're definitely right in the middle of that pack of the playoffs. But I mean, this team, they just keep on surprising, Ryan, and they keep on, I feel like getting better almost, and they keep on playing, you can see it every night, which is something that's really, fun for Knicks fans. You can see the young guys start playing better. You see Julius Randle now growing into this star right now. And that's just, it's just really fun to watch. There's no other way I can say it.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember my early one-on-ones in the NBA season. Knicks started maybe 5-3 or whatever. I go, I back up. I say, I'm not ready to get my heart broken. It's nice, but I'm not expecting anything. Completely different now. I am ready. I am all in on this team, 110%. It's been so fun watching this team, 30-27. I was worried that they were going to tail off in the second half of the year. Everyone talked about the schedule, but when they're playing like this and when Julius Randle shoots like he did last night, it's such a treat. Objectively, he is better than Porzingis right now. He's been awesome. So that's been kind of a stunning development to see, the biggest plan B, right? They're going for KD, Kyrie, they fall on their face and they land up with Julius Randle, who's ended up just having an outstanding year. Last night, I think he scored the first 10 points for the Knicks. So just awesome to see. RJ Barrett's development too is, I think another huge storyline of this season because last year was up and down. He gave you the points, but he wasn't efficient. This year, he's giving you more points. He's efficient. He plays defense. He's the perfect build for this NBA. He's a wing. So it's been awesome to see him kind of solidify as legit number 2 on a playoff team. And let's not get mistaken. This is a playoff team. 6th seed right now. We'll get into the play and stuff in a little bit. Let's hope the Knicks can avoid that, get the extra rest. But, they're playing great. Tom Thibodeau is saying the right things. He says, we're just looking to the next one. We're not getting ahead of ourselves. I think that's the perfect mentality. And it really is just nice to see, as he talked about, they're in the headlines for the right reasons. And that never happens with the Knicks. So I'm super pumped. I think it's been a great season overall. And they're not done. I have expectations. I'd like to see this team in the playoffs. I expect them to be. They're in the home stretch. They have to finish strong here. 5 in a row, as you mentioned, first time in 7 years is great. They hadn't even won 4 in a row this year and just did it now. So they're playing their best basketball, and it's fun to see. And it's a treat to finally see them playing well.
Really, they keep on surprising because you thought this team, they're a defensive team, but you didn't think they had the scoring enough to go on a streak. That was kind of my thing. They were kind of sticking in it. They'd always stick around 500 because the defense was so good and they'd stick in games and they'd be able to gut it out. But you didn't think they could win 5. We'll see how long the streak goes because we didn't think the offense would be as good. And, Julius Randle has just been outstanding and he's starting to grow into a player that, you want taking that last shot in a playoff game, which is something that is just huge. And that's something, I see your eyes rolling. That's something when you go into a playoff series, I think this team is starting to build that playoff identity where you see they have, a defense. They, hopefully are, getting this star ready for Julius Randle. He can maybe take over a game down the stretch. And we've seen that over the last few games. Then you see a guy like RJ Barrett, who's growing, probably not into that number 2 like star yet, obviously not, but you see him growing and you see him getting there. And like, that's something that is so important for this team. They have pretty good depth as well. And like, you just keep on thinking like, what if this Knicks team, they go to, everyone's like, well, what if they go to the playoffs early on? You're talking like they're 5-3. What if they keep this up? And like, what if they go to the playoffs? Now it's like, what if they can win a series? And I think in the right matchup, they may be able to, and they at least may be really competitive, which is just crazy to think about. And like, I think this team is on the right direction towards where they want to go, which is something I didn't think I'd ever see under James Dolan. And that's something that, a year ago, if you would have told me that like this team is going to be in the right direction, like they're going to be set up basically how the Nets were like 3 years ago. And, maybe in a few years, they'll be the team that goes out and gets the big stars. And then you could really be serious like the Nets are for a championship. That's something that just gets me extremely excited.
Yeah, I mean, they really are just following the Nets blueprint, honestly, right? Get former Lakers high overall pick, didn't really work out, have him develop into an all-star type player and build a winning culture. And, we'll see down the road if it works out. But right now, they have a winning culture. I remember early in the season, the one guy really who didn't work out, funny enough, was Austin Rivers. And he talked about, before anyone really was thinking about the Knicks, that this is a good team. Like, I've been on bad teams before. This is not one of them. And I kind of shook my head. I was like, okay, like you won 3 games. Like, let's relax here. But this is not a bad team. This is a really good team. And you talked about, will they be able to win a series? The one thing I do know is they will play 100%. They will give a team their all. They will push a team to its limits. The Knicks don't roll over anymore. I think that's what's the best. They are going to go at you defensively. They're a monster, one of the best in the league. And with the offense playing the way it is, with RJ shooting as efficient as he is, with Randall giving you 44 on 6 threes, they're scary. That's a nightmare for teams, with the defense as good as it is. So I do have a lot of optimism. We'll see the matchups. I think they'd have to get a really favorable matchup to have a chance. But right now I'm just enjoying the win streak. They're beating who they should, right? They stole that Memphis game, and then they beat up on the Raptors and Lakers, Pelicans as well. And then this was a game where I know it's been a few years, but I still smile at the Mavericks failures because obviously we know what happened there. That was probably the last straw with, the Knicks, and it looked like there was going to be dark days ahead when they trade Porzingis for pretty much nothing. But it's always great to beat the Mavericks, and I'm glad that they were able to. Yesterday, prime time on ESPN, nothing better than that. And they got to keep the train going. I know they're not going to slow down. They're going to keep playing hard. And I'm glad they are because it really is a treat. I mean, I keep going back to the same thing, but with how bad they were, Andrew, like it is such a refreshing, by this point in the NBA season, normal years, I'm checked out, right? My Knicks are 30 games under 500, wake me up on the lottery, and then we get upset in the lottery. But this year is different, and it's just so fun to see, and they got to keep it up. And I do think they will with Tom Thibodeau. I think he's the perfect coach to kind of keep a team with their head in the right direction, the way that he coaches, and they got to keep it up, and we'll see if they do.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be, I think as a Knicks, I've been always cautiously optimistic, like, oh, this is great, but I think it's going to end. And I've always been like that. And now hasn't ended yet, hasn't ended. So I'm hoping if this team gets to the playoffs, you'll take any playoff experience. Because if you can get RJ Barrett, big shots, meaningful shots at the end of games, playing in those playoff atmospheres, that experience is just invaluable. So that would be really, really important. And now going from the Knicks to a team, that's not up and coming. They're here and they're ready to win a championship. And that's the Nets right now, second in the East. As they just, you got the 3 stars. And I think the big thing with them is getting them on the court at the same time. But I'm not even too worried about that because I think Durant, he's played with stars. Talk about Kyrie has played with a guy, like LeBron James. Like he knows what he's doing there. And even James Harden, like he was the only guy I was worried about. And he's been really good at playing with stars and meshing, which is somewhat surprising for me, but it's worked out for the Nets. And, they were able to add a few guys here with the Nets, like veterans. I know, we'll get into the LaMarcus Aldridge stuff, but him didn't really work out because of health stuff. But with Blake Griffin, adding some other guys, their role players have played well. I mean, this Nets team is now starting to show that, this is it. This may be the year because especially, looking at the West, you have the Lakers kind of battered up. And, if they can get all their stars on the court at the right time, this team is just so scary. Whenever I watch the Nets, I feel like they have their best games too, and they just blow a team out by 20 in the first half. And you just see what Kyrie's able to do, and Durant, and all those guys. It's really fun to watch, even as a Knicks fan and you don't like the Nets, but it is fun to watch. It's really a treat to see these guys out on the court at the same time. And again, they're going to be right there for a championship, and I think they're right now definitely in the East. They're the leaders, ready to go. I mean, I know they're the 2 seed, but in the playoff series, you don't want to play the Nets, and that's something that I think is interesting. It's go time for them, and it's their time to now win a championship. You brought all these stars together. Now we're in this crunch time, getting ready for the playoffs to go out and win one.
Yeah, for as much as I'm, thrilled with the Knicks, I would give it all up to be where the Nets are.
Oh yeah,
without a doubt. They're on a collision course. They have one goal. It is the championship. Another guy who I brought up last week is someone that kind of gets brushed aside because of the stars, Joe Harris. He was the leading scorer last night. He's shooting 48% from 3. So that is huge to have a shooter like that. And he is the perfect role player for them. You talked about you're not concerned with, how them getting along. 100% agree. I think that always is a concern. You always hear the saying, there's only one basketball. What are they going to do? Stars figure it out. These guys are too talented to not make it work. They've only been on the court 7 games together, the big 3, which I think is the only concern I have with the Nets at all right now, is the inexperience of playing together. But I think that I have every reason to trust them. I think that, when you have the talent, it will work itself out. And it's not even just about the big 3, Joe Harris, Nick Claxton, and there's Shamet. They have other guys, and it would be, as you talked about, this team has to go to the finals. I've had interesting conversations. Like, if they don't win it all this year, is it a failure? I've leaned no, but, the later we get into the year, I'm leaning more yes, just because you have a window here, right? It's not like you have the next 10 years all in front of you. You have a 3-year window with these stars under contract. Who knows what happens after that? So they do have to make some damage. And I think when I look at the East, there's no one that can match up with them. I know Philly beat them the other day, but you had guys missing for the Nets. And I think in a full series, you can't match them offensively. So I do like the Nets to come out of the East. I think they on a collision course to the finals. We'll see what happens. Obviously, when you think these kind of things, they don't always work out, right? Lakers, Clippers, all year the talk was Lakers or Clippers, and it was the Nuggets who kind of stole that spot from the Clippers. So we're going to see what happens with the Nets. I have a ton of confidence that they'll be there at the end of the day because of the talent. And I do think that, you do have to look at it with the whole picture, because this team, they do need to win, coming up here. And I think this is the perfect year to do it, with kind of the East being a little down.
It's not even, I think, just the East. I think the West is really good. I think the West this year, but like the Lakers, I don't think are at full strength, and they're going to be battered. Like, there's a lot of good teams in the West, and I think the Nets may blow through the East, and then they'll be, should be ready, rested to go. And who's ever in the West, they're going to be battling it out, probably playing longer series. And, that, especially, we're going to talk about it with the injuries, just like that quick turnaround. And the playoffs, I think that's going to set in, especially with the Western Conference, just the way you have a lot of really good teams that you're going to have to play your best basketball. And, if your team, even if the Lakers, they do have LeBron and AD, against a rested Nets team, I don't know what they'll do. And I think this may be the best season for the Nets to go out and win it. And that's why I do think it's like, it'd be a failure if they don't, because we don't know what's going to happen next year. LeBron could be well rested, and they're going into the playoffs hot and ready to go. And that's just not what the Lakers are this year. So LeBron may not be as big as a factor. And just looking at all the other stars may not be as big as a factor. And, when you look at that, you're like, if you're the Nets, you're a Nets fan, you're definitely, thirsting at the mouth, ready to go, salivating, because this is now, your time to shine. And that's what I think is most interesting here about this Nets team, because I think this is a perfect situation for them. Like, that's why I think it is. Like, they gotta take this chance, because they may not have another chance where the West is so good, where, it may not work out, and the East is just no one's there. So I think this is really their best shot.
And, we talk about, like, you never know with injuries, but while they are injured now, it's not serious stuff. So you hold your breath that nothing happens, because I think that is the only way things go south with the Nets. If one of these big 3 gets hurt, and then, stuff happens. We've seen, obviously, the Warriors with KD getting hurt, Clay getting hurt. You do never know. So I do think the goal is to keep them rested, and the playoffs, that's the only thing they have on their mind, only thing they should have on their mind. And it's all about getting there. And if they get there, and if they're healthy, there's no reason, as we talked about, they can't be in the finals, and no reason they can't win at all.
No, yeah, for sure. And again, that's going to wrap up the local part of our NBA, which, again, these 2 teams really fun. And again, I feel like the city's energized because of it, which is, something that's really fun, because usually I feel like in the last few years, like football, everyone loves football. And then there's that middle, until you get to baseball, and basketball's been that, really mainstay in New York in that middle, which is always, really, really fun in those January, Februarys. And both teams have given fans a lot of reasons to watch. during those months. But now I do want to move over to some more broader stuff, and especially about ownership and that type of stuff. As a Mets fan, I've been through this kind of change of ownership, and it's happening in the NBA as well here. Starting off with the Jazz, as Dwayne Wade has bought a stake in the Jazz. We don't know how big it is yet, but it said that Wade wants to be involved. He wants to be hands-on, which I think is really interesting because we've seen in the NBA owners being hands-on, talk about Michael Jordan and whoever, it may be. And we don't really know. He was a great player on the court, Wade, but we don't know what he's going to do as an owner. And the Jazz are in a pretty, good situation right now. They're a good team. They're building. And I wonder what, kind of stake Wade wants to take in this team. I mean, he says he wants to be hands-on, but how hands-on does he want to be, in those player decisions? Like, it's going to be interesting to see that. And I think that dynamic is interesting when looking just also how good the Jazz are right now, building something that looks pretty special. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's the next few years, but they're definitely building. And then you bring in Dwayne Wade, I wonder how he wants to get involved with this team, especially on the court.
Yeah, well, he's talked about, this is the next stage of his life, his post-playing career. Everyone addresses it differently. And he said this about investing. He's trying to be a businessman, entrepreneurship, all that stuff, which I'm all for. Obviously, he has, a great wealth from his playing career, and it's time to kind of grow your portfolio. And it is cool. I saw a lot of people talk about how, oh, you're betraying the Heat. And he actually did talk to the Heat about getting a little role. So I think that's interesting. He's definitely had this on his mind, right? If he went to the Heat first, but he does whatever he wants. I'm all for it. I do think in the long run, it could really help the Jazz because Utah is not Los Angeles. It's not New York. It's not, no offense to Utah, if anyone out there is from Utah, but it's not one of these primetime destinations for stars. So if he's able to, he's a good friend with Donovan Mitchell. If he's able to connect with him, get him to stay, long-term, which I think is a question mark with Donovan Mitchell kind of, breaking out a little bit this year. So I do think that's interesting what we'll see there. And we don't know the terms of the stake yet or, how vocal he'll be, but I do like him kind of going for it and doing something unique. He's done a ton of different businesses. He's a TNT analyst, obviously. So I do like him expanding, and we'll see what happens with the Jazz because I think it's cool when players own teams, honestly. Like, I think it's obviously Michael Jordan with the Hornets. He's not the most outspoken about things, but, when you get those quotes every now and then, it's pretty cool. Dwayne Wade's great with the media too. So I'm looking forward to that.
No, yeah, I mean, Ryan, you sure Salt Lake City is not a big place to play? I mean, I think I'd want to play there. I mean, get some skiing in, basketball. I mean, I don't know. I mean, especially with these teams. I mean, but anyways, moving over now to the second kind of big ownership group here. And, you talked about how owning a team's a really great investment. And that kind of plays into this one. A-Rod buying the Timberwolves with Mark Lowe, obviously A-Rod, the big Yankee slugger, former, the whole thing with him. I don't have to get into him. And he's been in the news lately with him and J-Lo breaking up and all of that stuff. Had to put that in here as well. But you talk about how just it's a great investment. Who A-Rod's buying it from with Mark Lowe is Glenn Taylor. And he actually bought the Timberwolves for $88 million in 1994 and then sold it for $1.5 billion. So talk about a great investment. There you go. And, so I bet Wade's going to try to do that. But A-Rod, for me, in this one, I just hope he's hands off. I hope he doesn't try to be a James Dolan. This team's trying to rebuild different than the Jazz, obviously. Mark Lore, same thing. Like, that's the big thing with owners. I think the best thing, especially when you're not like Dwayne Wade or Michael Jordan, you don't have basketball experience, just stay out of it. Like, hire someone that's good at it, that can build a team, that that, and let them make the decisions. I think that's the best for an owner. And then once in a while, coming in the public light, like he probably will, do a few things. A-Rod, obviously a big name, but again, I feel like with A-Rod, just be hands off. That's my one message to him.
Let me clarify this before I get into it. I love A-Rod. I love everything about him. I think his transformation from kind of I think his transformation from the villain to kind of a good guy has been one of the most remarkable things. Obviously throughout his career, he was a hothead, and he's kind of transformed himself that year off, obviously changed who he was as a person. And so I think it speaks to him where I don't know who else in this entire world, they miss out on something and their consolation prize is buying an NBA team, right? Obviously he wanted the Mets. That was his number one thing. That doesn't work out. I may as well buy the Timberwolves. Only A-Rod, I think, has that kind of persona and personality. You talked about him being hands off. I don't know what'll happen there. They're not taking over until 2023, which I think is important. Maybe he learns the in and outs of being an owner. He learns everything in that sense before he takes over. I think that's good because you're not throwing him to the fire. He's also buying with Mark Lore, I think it's pronounced. He's the CEO of Walmart. So he's clearly got some business acumen. A-Rod's not going in this barehanded and, out there to dry. So I do think it's cool. I love that he's getting involved. I see him and Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards got asked, he's like, I got no clue who that is. And then A-Rod's going at him. He's like, what's up, Anthony? I'm A-Rod. So I think that's kind of a funny back and forth there. We'll see what happens with that. Not until 2023 as well, which I think is important. The Timberwolves are kind of in a weird spot because they have been kind of, stuck in this limbo. They have Karl Anthony Towns. Obviously, they land the first pick in the lottery, but they're not really going anywhere. They're young. They have a good core, but the winning has just not been there at all. The best they've got was an 8 seed with Jimmy Butler, where people thought they underperformed. And turns out with what Jimmy Butler's done since then, getting that team to the playoffs was miraculous. So we'll see what happens there with A-Rod. I have no doubts he'll make them a winner. I love A-Rod. No, I don't know what'll happen there. We'll see. I don't know how involved he'll be. I don't know how he's going to live in Minnesota. I don't see him as a Minnesota guy at all. Maybe the last city on the entire planet I'd see A-Rod living in. But we'll see what happens there. It should be interesting. I like, as I said with Dwayne Wade, I like when guys get involved and, they do it for the business. They do it for whatever reason. I think it's good.
The one thing I will say about A-Rod is that I'm eternally grateful that he did not buy the Mets, that Steve Cohen wanted to, because A-Rod and that J-Lo split up with the Mets, it would have been the biggest news. And around this team, the Wilpons would have still been involved. Like, once I heard that, I knew A-Rod that's not the ticket. I'm sorry. And I don't know how he's going to own this basketball team, probably different than he'd own a baseball team. But that's all my A-Rod. I'm just happy it's not my team. That's all I can say. And again, like the whole story is that he wanted to go to the Mets, but ended up going to the Yankees because they gave him a lot more money. It's just, I hate that. That just sours me, that A-Rod could have been a Met and like all that stuff for the 2000 run with Mike Piott. Like that would have just been amazing. Didn't happen. He goes to the Yankees, wins the World Series, but I'll leave it at that and return to the NBA here. As I want to talk about these injuries here to wrap up our segment, because I think this year, and I've been saying it really since the beginning, as it's just an interesting year because, and this is why I thought the Knicks would actually be pretty solid, because the Knicks had this long layoff and they were well rested while, teams were coming in, especially like those teams that made the bubble, but maybe weren't the best teams. They were coming in off of, a pretty tough experience where it's, game after game after game, playing in a bubble, living in a bubble, all that stuff. Like, and then quick turnaround, 2 months you play. And like, I thought that was going to be hard for, some teams, and especially, that war of attrition was going to set in right around this point. And it seems like it has, especially with the injuries. Talk about, a guy like Jamal Murray, who, again, the eighth tearing his ACL, he's going to be out long-term, but even like the shorter term injuries with LeBron, the AD, Donovan Mitchell, I kind of want to talk about, how is this going to affect now our playoffs? Is now getting stars on the court going to be a problem at the right time? And, will a team like the Nets, who kind of been, I feel like, resting their stars throughout the whole season, being very cautious, are they doing the right thing to get all their guys back really just for the playoffs? As they basically play one star a night. It seems like you have Kyrie play this one, Harden plays this one, KD plays this one almost. I mean, maybe that was the right thing. I mean, I know everyone talks about the sitting and how that's not good, but I feel like in this year that may be the best way to go, and that's maybe why the Nets are probably in the really the driving seat right now. And that's why I really wanted to. I think this is going to be a huge factor, not only in the regular season, but probably in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, I do think it's fascinating because we'll never see this again, this quick turnaround.
Yeah.
You talk about Jamal Murray, and I can't help but think back to the bubble. They made a deep run.
Yeah.
The Nuggets were in it all the way. Western Conference Finals, Jamal Murray single-handedly won them some games in those bubble. And so you talk about the attrition, the quick turnaround. I don't want to speculate, but you have to factor that plays a role in this injury. And it's the reason why, Damian Lillard sat out yesterday. Today, I know the Jazz, Donovan Mitchell, he's going to be out for a few games, maybe a week or so. They're just going to sit all their starters today, Gobert, Conley. And this is why you do it. You got to keep these guys fresh. And I know we're in an age where guys just sit out whenever they want, and it certainly hurts the NBA, but this is why they do it at the same time, because you have Jamal Murray who goes 110% every day. He's young, so he's fresh, but it catches up to you at some point, and it really is a shame, looking at the Nuggets, because they're 7-2 since the Aaron Gordon trade. Jamal Murray made huge improvements. He showed the bubble was no fluke, career high in points per game, field goal percentage, and 3 points. So he really emerged as a really good number two, and we saw with the Nuggets last year, they made damage. They made noise in the bubble. So I was really looking forward to that. Obviously they have an MVP candidate in Jokic. We'll see what happens there. But I do think when you look at injuries, this is why guys sit out. You don't want to get hurt, especially with the playoffs coming up so soon. Anything kind of above minor, you're pretty much sidelined for a while now. So really unfortunate for the Nuggets, and it just shows why these guys do it. It's important also. The Lakers right now, they're injured. LeBron and AD, they obviously won the championship, so they're playing all the way. I know the Heat have had some issues. Bam Adebayo missed some games. Yeah. So I do wonder if it is that attrition, and it looks like it's setting in for some guys, and this is why guys do sit out at the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this season more like I think this season it's actually like justified. I mean, maybe in past seasons it's been a little too much when like Kawhi Leonard, like there was stuff that he would like plan out his schedule, whatever it may be. Like, so maybe that would have been too much and like what he does. But I think this year, I mean, I don't think really any in professional sports, I mean, a 2-month turnaround is quick. I mean, obviously you want to take some time away from the game and probably not do anything basketball for a few weeks. And then you have to go right back at it to start, your off-season prep for, obviously it'd be extremely accelerated. And like that to me is a big issue. And you see these types of injuries like the ACLs and the hamstrings. Like I feel like that is kind of that war of attrition setting in, just like that the hamstring pulls or whatever it may be, the sprains and like that stuff. Those types of injuries. I think they kind of set in at this time where they've been playing basketball nonstop for a long time, almost a year. And like that's why even going into the season, I was like, the Knicks may have a shot because they're going to be fresh. And like I know we've talked about the Knicks already, but that's why I think those teams that maybe a little more fresh, they obviously have an advantage. Maybe like the Nets because they were smart and sat their starters. The Clippers do that too. You talked about Dame Lillard doing that, and maybe it stinks for the fans that are going that day. That maybe like their first ever NBA game, they don't get to see the big stars, but. Big picture, I think that could be. This is probably the only season because I don't really like sitting your starters, but this may be the only season where I'm happy for it, and I'm like, you kind of have to do it because you want every star to be in now the playoffs and have a really good playoffs.
No, yeah, you have to be smart here because especially these teams like the Nets, where the goal is the championship. I know we just talked about them, but the only way that really you get in some trouble is with injuries, and you're seeing it around the league. It's not like no one's getting injured, so. You have to be careful. You have to be smart. And I agree. Normally, I'm super against sitting out. The Kawhi stuff was ridiculous in Toronto that year where he literally just back-to-backs. Nope, never played him. So this year it is more justified with the turnaround. We'll never see it again, a 2-month turnaround for the season. And so I want these guys healthy because the NBA is all about their stars and you need the stars. And, as a fan of basketball, that Jamal Murray, Donovan Mitchell duel in the first round last year is something I'll never forget. And now both guys are injured. So it's unfortunate. We'll see what happens there. And I just hope that this is the last time we're talking about a big NBA injury.
No, yeah, for sure. So we're going to take a quick pause on our NBA talk as we are going to take a break. Sam Davis will join us next for some NBA headlines. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
We're back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Sam Davis with more headlines here. In the NBA, Mavericks owner Mark Cuban and their star player Luka Doncic came out against the NBA's new play-in tournament as the Mavs, this is very important, currently hold the number 7 seed in the West. They're slated to be in that play-in tournament as of now. In normal circumstances, obviously, the Mavs would be set to play the 2 seed in the first round, but now they're going to have to win at least one of 2 games in the play-in tourney to make that first round tournament. So Doncic and Cuban both kind of see this as unfair after playing a very long season and having it come down to basically 2 games, especially because normally they would already be in as that number 7 seed, like I said. So, Andrew, I'm going to start with you here. What are your thoughts on the play-in tournament for the NBA playoffs this upcoming season? Do you agree with Doncic and Cuban here?
It's kind of interesting because I think there are a few, I think there are a few problems with it. I think the tournament as a whole isn't like an awful idea, especially I think, as I said, I think earlier, like the NBA playoffs can get stale, I feel, just because there's so many games, so many teams make it. And this is kind of just like a cool stakes are up at the beginning of the playoff. But I think if there should be like something like if the 7 seed is like 3 games better than the 8 seed, like they shouldn't have to play, or also the same on the back end, like the 11 seed, if they're like or the 10 seed, is way ahead of the 11 seed or way behind, not close to that 9 seed or close. I don't think they should probably be in it either. Like, don't love having like under 500 teams in it, but it's like that's just kind of like where I am with it. So I understand, like if you're a 7 seed and you're far ahead, of that 8 seed, like, well, why do I have to play this extra game to win? And then, if you're close though, I mean, like, yeah, you should be there because, you haven't really earned it. So I think it kind of depends on that front. But I do think the one thing about a play-in tournament, I think it does help these teams, especially because they're going to go up and play a 1 seed or a 2 seed. And those teams are obviously going to be better. You gain some, you play a game or 2, and you're able to gain some momentum. And I think that's really important if you can, especially momentum in these series, because if you can come in with momentum, maybe stun that 1 seed once or twice to start the series, and then you're in it. And like, I think that could be really valuable. So that's kind of where I feel on this play-in tournament. Kind of complicated because I like the idea of it. It's just, I understand like the execution of it may not be the best, but I think the idea as a whole is pretty good.
Yeah, let me clarify this. If it helped the Knicks, I'd be the biggest fan of it, and if it hurt, I would be bashing it, which is kind of what funny with the Mavericks, because Mark Cuban did vote to approve it before the year. Uh-huh. And now, of course, it's an enormous mistake. But, I do think it's interesting. It's needed. It'll help with the loss of revenue, right? You can sell these games to networks as playoff games. Obviously, with no fans, it hurt them. You can sell those tickets and everything like that. So I get it. We saw baseball do something similar with a play-in tournament last year, where pretty much half the teams made the playoffs, best of 2. And so I do agree with you, Andrew, 100% with like the games back. You have that clarification, because if you do have an 8 seed that's way back or something like that, it's kind of unfair that in one game they can, let's say a point guard goes cold for the 7 seed and then it's done, because basketball isn't a sport where it's one game. That's what people say about the wild card game, why they don't like it in the MLB, because one bad start, you're out of there. And so I do think it's interesting in that aspect, but with the 72 game season being condensed like this, I don't know if I'm a fan of it. Like the Mavericks in normal year, as we said, would clearly be in the playoffs. And now they're going to have to fight and get in the play-in games. And it also gives the 1 through 6 season advantage because they get the extra rest. So there's a ton of aspects here, I think, to look at. And so I don't blame, Doncic and Cuban for getting upset because they're playing relatively good basketball and they're still kind of fighting for a 6 seed, which it really is a huge difference this year, the 6 and 7. And I don't know if it's a permanent solution. I don't think it is. If they did something with the games back, maybe I would be for that. But for a COVID year, I understood it from that aspect, but it will be frustrating for the teams for sure.
Yeah, I think who's ever in that 7 seed, I would say in both conferences, isn't going to like it. And I feel like everyone else just about will. I mean, I know a 10 and a 9 seed definitely would like it if they get a chance to play in a playoff game, which they wouldn't have under normal circumstances. I mean, obviously 1 through 6, like you said, they get a little bit more of a rest, which I think they appreciate as well. And that's where I feel like these comments are coming from. It comes from the fact that the Mavs are in that location, are in that position. They're playing pretty good basketball, obviously. But for my thought process is that if you're the Mavericks, it's important to note that it's not like the 7 and 8 seed. It's a single elimination game. They do have 2 opportunities. And I think that's really important. And I think that makes this a little bit more fair. If it was like 7 and 8, win or go home 1 game, I don't think that's fair at all. I don't think you can do that to a team, but I do get it for the 10 and 9 because they wouldn't be in the playoffs anyway. So you give them a chance to kind of get on a little bit of almost like a Cinderella run where they can win a couple games and then find themselves in the first round of the playoffs. But for the 7-8 seed, if you can't win 1 out of 2 home games before the first round, I don't think you deserve to be in the playoffs. And I know that's, okay, you can't base it on 1 game, but I think you can base it on 2, if I'm being totally honest, especially it is a slightly shorter season, a COVID season here. We're still facing the effects of that, of course. That's why, for me, I don't mind the move. I think it's an interesting thing to do. Long term, though, I don't necessarily – it's harder for me to get on board with it, if I'm being honest, with a normal full season. I don't know. The playoffs are already big. There's already a lot of teams in it in the NBA playoffs. So really adding another 2, is that going to make for almost too many playoff games to the point where people don't really care about the 10-9 matchup? I think this year a lot of people are going to care about it because it's new and it's exciting. I know I'll be watching just because it's new. It's the first time. So, but going forward, will people really care about a 10-9 matchup in an already big playoff field? I don't really think so. So for me, I do like it this year, but going forward in the future, I don't know if it's going to be the best thing for the NBA. I think the only thing I will say too is I think with baseball is another good example. It's a good parallel because they did the expanded playoffs. But with baseball, I think originally I was kind of against them. But then once they happened, I think a lot of fans were like, okay, I do kind of like this. And it seems like that might be coming back down the road. So I think for the NBA, it's hard for me to believe this play-in is just going to be a one-time thing. I think as much as I say it's not great for the future come playoff time, I think it will be a part of it just because once you kind of get your foot in the water, it seems like it's gonna stay that way, and the play-in tournament's gonna continue down the road.
I mean, there's money there, so I think it's gonna stay for that reason. And I mean, it's almost like baseball when they added the first stage of the wild card game. It was just the 1 game, and that had the kind of the effects. Everyone was like, oh, you play 162 games, and it comes down to 1 game, and I definitely see that. The Mets were in it, and they ended up losing it. And you had such they were coming in hot, and they obviously didn't get a lot of time and got 1 game, but I kind of liked it. You feel like you're in a win or go home type game. And I feel like when you're, even the Mavs, I know they're playing good basketball now, but they weren't earlier in the season. So that also gives you maybe to play your starters more Ryan and I were talking about. Maybe this will have people rest their starters less for that reason. And especially maybe in the beginning of the year, maybe now once they see kind of where they, shape out, they'll still be able to sit them. Maybe in the beginning of the season, not so much. So maybe that's a way to combat that as well. But that's just kind of, I feel like it happened in baseball. It kind of worked. And NBA, because of this COVID, they were like, oh, let's try it. We get some extra money. 2 extra teams get a chance to make the playoffs, and we'll see how it works. I think it needs some kind of altering, but if they kept it long term, especially if it helped the Knicks, I feel like right now, I'm kind of liking it because now it gives the Knicks a little extra safety net to make the playoffs and at least make the play-in tournament. So that's just kind of, I guess where I'm looking at from this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps both New York basketball teams, to be honest, because it gives the Nets a little bit time to rest too as well, which could be good in terms of their injuries as well. And it certainly helps the Knicks. It gives them a little bit buffer zone heading into the playoffs. So to transition here to a little bit, obviously more of a sad news, certainly. On Thursday, the newly acquired Brooklyn net LaMarcus Aldridge announced that he is very abruptly going to retire from the NBA. He had an irregular heartbeat, playing with the Nets in the last game, and what would be his last game of his career. He's 35 years old, and he says he wants to put his health and his family first. And obviously, everybody totally respects that and understand. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult situation. But Ryan, I want to go to you first here. What were kind of your initial thoughts when this news first broke about LaMarcus Aldridge?
Well, yeah, at first I was completely shocked. I had no idea where it was coming from. And then I read his message and I really felt for him. He said in 2007, he was diagnosed with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, which is, I guess, caused the irregular heartbeat. And then during that game against the Lakers, obviously, it went up. And that's really scary to have an irregular heartbeat. I'm sure, good thing he had the best doctors in the world, I'm sure, with the Nets. But that's something you never want to have to go through. And I think a health scare like that probably puts your life in perspective. And it's not worth it to, get a few more seasons in if it's putting your health second. Your health should always be first. So I think from that aspect, I get it 100%. He has to do what's best for him and his family. I put myself in, if I was his son or whatever, I wouldn't want my dad playing basketball or my son playing basketball if he had an irregular heartbeat. So, it came as a shock, but if knowing the situation, I got it. In terms of the basketball perspective, it's interesting because I think he was kind of solidifying himself as the small ball five in this Nets lineup. He kind of pushed DeAndre Jordan out of the rotation, which is something that not a ton of people were talking about. He was done. He was getting DNPs every night. He had no role on this team. And now I guess DeAndre Jordan will, they rely on him a little more. And so from that aspect, I think it's interesting. Obviously with the Nets, they have so much star power. I don't think it hurts them. But LaMarcus Aldridge was a really solid player, 7-time All-Star, made 5 All-NBA teams. So he had a great career overall. I remember those years in Portland where it was him and Dame were a great 1-2 punch. They were scoring, combined like 50 a game together, like every game. So really solid career for LaMarcus Aldridge. And I guess it's unfortunate it had to end the way it did.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think it's disheartening for him just because first of all, it's probably scary just like when it happened, but like for him, I think the career ending just so abruptly is tough to deal with, but health first, 100%, definitely it's not like, I feel like at this point, I don't want to say ring chasing, but he kind of was going to the Nets. And like at this point in his career, it's not something that a regular heartbeat, you don't fool around with that. Like that's, definitely, it's not like he needs to do it. Doesn't need to play basketball. So, for him, again, it's tough, but that's definitely the right decision for him and his family. And like for him, I just feel like he's a steady Eddie. I feel like when he played for Portland and then he played for, the Spurs, he was always out there 20 and 10, being that big man who can shoot. I think he revolutionized the game a little in that way, kind of starting to do that, was one of the first guys. And, for him, it's like, and so abruptly after he was playing 15 years when he was just a solid player. And like, that is just really tough. That's why I was like, whoa. And like, it kind of just like, at first I thought I misread it. And like, I thought it was like, maybe he didn't not playing this game, and ended up being obviously the career. So it's tough. It's tough for him in his career. And I mean, like the Nets, I think they'll be fine from it. I mean, again, I think he was a good role player for them, but I think they'll be able to, especially with all that star power, make up for it. But for him, it's tough as he was trying to get that coveted ring and really solidify his career, but still amazing career for him. Average was like 19 and 8, and we'll see what he does in the future. Hopefully, we still see him, maybe a commentator or something, because he seems like a really nice guy too. And yeah, I mean, it's just for him, it's definitely saddening, as we thought maybe this would be the chance for him to get, that coveted ring.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this. I'm sure there was a lot that went into this decision. I mean, first of all, just obviously he must have, like you guys said, an incredibly shocked and incredibly scary situation at first, to have this situation happen. And then from there, I think I want to give him credit for the maturity he's able to show here to really step away from the game of basketball, because, I mean, it's very obvious that he loves the game of basketball. He's done it his whole life. And, he mentioned that in his statement, he put basketball first for a number of years, which is what a lot of these players do. It requires a lot of motivation and determination, obviously, to get to the NBA. I mean, just being able to step away from that game that you love, not only is it incredibly difficult, but I think it requires a lot of maturity to recognize that, my health and my family is the most important thing here. And obviously he made that decision, and I'm sure, the Nets organization and just everyone in the NBA community totally respects that decision. And from the Nets standpoint, I agree with both you guys. I think it might be a little bit of a problem just short term in terms of them They did rely on him, and he was a very nice piece for them. While, things with James Harden and is a little shaky there, as he's obviously not back. But overall, once they get back Harden, it won't be a serious issue. But I mean, it is certainly a guy that they relied on, and then certainly a guy that was very good producing for this team, a very good addition for them. But I mean, the Nets have plenty of opportunities going forward and come playoff time. But obviously the biggest focus here is for LaMarcus Aldridge personally. You want him to get well. You want him to be healthy. And that's the bottom line. But I just really respect, honestly, the maturity out of this decision to step away from the game of basketball, which I no doubt he loves very much.
Sam, I wanted to echo that because, I was fortunate enough to, go to the few of the Nets press conferences, on Zoom, obviously. And just like the way he handled himself, it was very mature, like going to a new team and like the way he was even playing on the floor. And, he was able to just, I feel like, fit right in there and, do a lot of great stuff for them. And, he looked like, even like, I think Blake Griffin's taken some time to get into that offense, but he just looked like he was ready to go from day one, which is something, he had a long layoff and like coming to the Nets, and he was able to be a solid player and then really a leader in that, that team. So it'll be interesting to see how they can replace him. I think they'll be able to, just because I think this team is just so deep. They have so many stars. I don't think it'll be a problem, but for him, just a great career for him, 7-time All-Star. And I mean, for him to just be able to put his family first, put his life first, really is, definitely something that's good for him, and definitely wish him all the best. But that is going to wrap up this headlines on the NBA. Next, me and Ryan are going to be talking all things NFL. Thank you, Sam, for bringing us our headlines tonight. We'll be right back on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome back into One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Ryan Gregware, and now we get into our NFL talk here on the gridiron. As you know, I feel like we're getting to this time. I mean, this is like the weird 2 weeks before the draft, but you're still, after free agency, still kind of in these second, third waves. And there's still some news here. I feel like now the draft is almost getting beaten to death a little bit, just because obviously there's a lot to talk about. But I feel like between the Zach Wilson and the Justin Fields, all that stuff. But we'll jump into some of that later. But first, I want to start off here with Jadeveon Clowney, who signed a 1-year, $10 million deal, $8 million base. And obviously the former number one overall pick will be going to the Browns, teaming up with Myles Garrett, the other number one overall pick, and which I think is really interesting. I mean, the Browns to me just have a dominant front now, and they get some depth here with Clowney. But to me, I think that's what Clowney is, depth. I mean, the Saints were looking into him before last season, and there was kind of a little of a saga. They were thinking about trading a second-round pick for money, basically, so they can sign him, which was kind of interesting. And I'm happy they didn't do that because obviously it didn't work out. Trey Hendrickson for the Saints kind of bursted onto the scene. But with Clowney, didn't have a good year last year. And to me, he's just depth at this point, but he got paid, a good amount. I mean, looking at a guy who's good against the run, but to me, he just can't generate his own pass rush. He needs stunts and that type of stuff to get to the quarterback. Really, at this point of his career, all the injuries are a problem as well. And he still gets $10 million. It kind of brings up a point where you have a lot of veterans on the market, but Clowney Waits gets paid a good amount, $10 million, $8 million base. I mean, that's still a good payday for a guy that, had no sacks last year. So when looking at everyone still on the market, I'm kind of interested to see if these veterans, will they, kind of take the Bucks, kind of way of getting, taking these veteran minimum deals and trying to win a Super Bowl with Tom Brady, or are they going to be like Clowney, trying to wait out the market and, trying to get paid a little bit and, maybe be more of a depth piece, but you still get paid. And the Browns, they're a pretty solid team, especially up front. So I thought that would be kind of cool because you just have so many names still out there, from Melvin Ingram to Geno Atkins, you have Quan Alexander, Richard Sherman, you can go on. And for me, that's a kind of an interesting thing. I think it's going to happen after the draft more, but you see Clowney do it before the draft. We'll see, is money going to take over, or is that, veteran minimum, trying to build, really a Super Bowl winning team here? I think that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I see this Clowney deal as a flyer, right? I mean, it's a 1-year deal, so you're not investing years into him. And I have no problem with it, honestly. The money at this point in free agency, it's just cap. So you got to spend it somewhere, right? And so you talked about him generating the pass rush, and I agree, he really can't. And last year was a mess from overall in Tennessee, nightmare season, injuries, ineffective, whatever. But where Clowney makes his money is stopping the run. And that's something he's been able to do really good, even in, these 2018, 2019 years where he wasn't, the pass rusher he was maybe early on at Houston. He had an 88% stop rate. So he has been good at stopping the run, even that year in Seattle. Never been a sacks guy. I think his career high is 9.5. So that's not really what they're looking for here. And with Myles Garrett commanding all the attention he's going to, they don't need Clowney to be anything he isn't. He just really needs to stop the run, and this is a solid move. They're not asking him to be their number one prolific pass rusher, kind of like Tennessee was. You can't really rely on him for that, as we saw. So I don't have an issue with this deal at all. I'm sure, they kind of had to outbid because it was a little pricey, but at this point of free agency, no problem with it. I trust what the Browns are doing. I think they're building their team really smart. I really like their personnel. You talked about the defensive line. I think the overall roster, it's one of the best in the league. I expect them to be right back like they were last year. And I think Clowney, he doesn't have to do too much. He just has to really stop the run, maybe get home a few times on the court.
Stay healthy.
Yeah, that is the big thing for sure. He's healthy, he will be effective most likely, but the health, I think he's only played all 16 games one season. So you're right on that aspect, but if he's healthy, I have no issue. It's a flyer. You're shooting at a dartboard here. And if it sticks, it's a really good move.
I mean, for me, I agree with you. It's kind of like a flyer, but two problems for me. It's they cut Sheldon Richardson, who was a starter for them last year. So that was kind of the switch out they made, for Clowney. And for me, yes, they are only giving him 1 year, but the cap hit spans over 5 years. So you have to pay him down the line. And then kind of my thing is that if you save the cap, it goes over to next year, which could be big too, could add you more cap space. And I don't know, Clowney, I just feel like he's a guy that, if he starts, he's not going to probably give you a ton of sacks. Now, if Myles Garrett's fine, then you should be okay. But that's just kind of my issue there. But I mean, for me overall, been good for Clowney. He got paid $10 million after having no sacks the year before, taking basically back-to-back prove-it deals, which is kind of interesting. And we'll see, I think, where this market goes, because I think it's interesting because you have so many guys available. Like, if I was the Browns, I'd much rather sign Justin Houston to a 1-year deal, who I think had like 8 sacks last season, which is pretty good. I'd much rather sign a guy like Geno Atkins or Quan Short, Jarrell Casey. Like, those are kind of, I think Olivier Vernon's out there, Ryan Kerrigan. Like, I'd take those guys over Clowney. At least they had sacks last year. And I think that's what I'm trying to get into, is that there's just so many guys available right now. And I think the question is going to be after the draft. But Ryan, I wanted to know, what's one player that, you think out of all these guys could be a diamond in the rough for a team, maybe a team after the draft looking still as a whole? What's one player you think could give the most value here out of everyone left?
So there's a ton of guys left. Let's make that clear. A lot of these guys are going to be starting on teams next year. And so obviously you have Richard Sherman, a ton of secondary help, Richard Sherman, Casey Hayward. But a guy that I think is falling very, very under the radar is Brian Poole, who's been on the Jets the last 2 years. And I've watched a ton of him being a Jets fan. And he has been really solid in the secondary. So I think he's a solid player. He has good hands. He's average. He's an average corner. And in this day and age, though, that can play, especially with the speed we see outside. So I like Brian Poole. He's young as well. Most of these guys are old. Going back to your Clowney point, I think that's why he was so in demand. He still is young. He has untapped potential. Most of these guys are towards the end of their career, but if you find something at Clowney, it could be worth it. And the demand for pass rushers this offseason, I think, was also fascinating. And that's a topic for another day. You saw a ton of guys get paid a ton. Bud Dupree, the guy replacing Clowney in Tennessee, got a ton. Carl Lawson, Hendrickson, whatever. A ton of guys got paid, but I think Richard Sherman, obviously, we know him, big personality, backs it up with the play. They're waiting till after the draft to see what teams do. Casey Hayward, too, he was a Pro Bowl years ago. Kind of fell off a little bit. We'll see if he can kind of regain that form. But, yeah, there's still a ton of talent in free agency, kind of the second, third wave, as we talked about. And I expect these guys to fly off the board once the draft is over.
The one thing I want to about Casey Hayward real quick, he was a guy playing for the Chargers, and no one knew about him. He was all pro, and he just went onto the radar. Now, more towards the end of his career, it'll be interesting to see what team picks him up. I mean, I'm kind of, with my Saints, kind of looking towards a guy like him, who they need a cornerback if they can't get one in the draft. But for me, I mean, Trey Turner's still available out there, the guard, which, I mean, I feel like offensive line is such a big point in the NFL, especially now. And he's pretty solid, just looking what he's able to do. I mean, look, he's not the best guard in the league, but you just saw Joe Tooney get $85 million. So who's a guard? And I don't know how much worse Trey Turner is. So if I had extra money to spend and I needed an offensive lineman, I think Trey Turner would be a great fit. But even, the edge rushers, I mean, Melvin Ingram's another guy who's available, who, we'll see where they goes. But it's interesting because this year with the COVID year and the salary cap drop, still a lot of vets out there. And, you just saw the Bucks, who were able to basically, fill out their roster with veterans, and it worked to perfection for them. They filled out, their front seven was amazing because of a lot of the veterans they had. And then also, on offense that, with AB and Fournette, and they were able to have some postseason success. And it'll be interesting to see if some other teams try to do that, as, obviously they're trying to copy the Bucks, what they're trying to do. But now, from free agency to the draft, from these veterans to the young guys, and, as I said before, there are kind of these narratives in the draft that I think kind of get beaten to death. And one of them is Justin Fields. And, first it was about how no Ohio State quarterback's ever good in the NFL. And that's kind of true. You look at the names, Dwayne Haskins is kind of the newest, guy, but that's no way to judge Fields off of. Then it was his work ethic, because I think, like they said, he's the last guy in, first guy out, which to me doesn't make much sense, because he played in, the semifinal national championship with broken ribs and outplayed Trevor Lawrence. And then the third thing was, he looks at receivers too long, and he's not good at going through his progressions. And, you have guys like Mac Jones who are just being, pushed up the draft boards for, to me, I don't really understand why. And you talk about if character concerns, talk about Mac Jones has multiple DUIs on his record. I mean, that's something I think you have to talk about. And Fields, clean record, nothing wrong with him. And you're talking about he's, the work ethic issues. And I don't know. I think Fields, if he drops, he's going to be, I think, a steal. Maybe if it's 10, maybe if it's 11, that's a steal for a guy like him. And I think he's more of a pro-ready prospect than even a guy like Zach Wilson. I think he has a less arm talent than Wilson, but I think he's still very talented, and he can run, diverse skill set. I think he has a pretty good delivery. I don't think he looks at, receivers too long. And if I'm one of these teams, if the Patriots get him, if they're able to trade up to 12, I'd be this is like Bill Belichick, I think, sending out these rumors so he can go, get him. But that's to me, I want to start. It's just like you see Mac Jones rising up lists for me for like no reason, and Justin Fields falling. And I think Fields could be, one of these guys that, is falls to like 12 and ends up being one of the better quarterbacks. Like that's almost what I feel about him. And again, I feel like for him, that's really tough because to me, he fell for no reason. Like that's, nothing in his control at least.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about this. Ton to talk about. First up, the Ohio State thing. Like, oh, you went to Ohio State.
Yeah.
That's such a lazy take, right? Every prospect, every quarterback is different. You evaluate them all differently. Just because he went to a school that doesn't produce good quarterbacks doesn't mean he's going to be good. That's ridiculous. So I never understood that. And I think it's fascinating because going into last season, Andrew, like it was Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, like 1A, 1B. It was like 1A, 1B. It was such a close gap. There was some people argued that Fields was even better. And Fields, he had an up and down year, a lot of up, maybe 1.5 games of down. And for his character and his work ethic to be attacked is shocking because we saw him, as you mentioned, in that semifinal game against Clemson, tear up an NFL defense in Clemson's defense, playing with broken ribs, bruised everything. He had every injury in the book. He was getting rocked out there. He was still moving. He was fighting. He had guts. Like he showed guts. He still showed his arm talent as well, which I do think it's not Zach Wilson's arm talent, but it's right there. It's still a great arm. He's mobile, as you said. He's dynamic, and he just has such a skill set that Mac Jones has none of those traits. Mac Jones doesn't have the mobility. Mac Jones isn't quick like him. So I do think like you have to look at that. So I'm really shocked. Like I don't really get it at all. My one thing, like conspiracy a little bit, is some team is planting some seeds, hoping that he can fall them a little bit. I can't think of anything else because Justin Fields is a spectacular talent. He's my quarterback 3 right now. I think the Niners should pick him. I don't know why, Mac Jones is getting catapulted, as you talked about, from, going into this year, he was not even a draft guy. Then he was kind of a day 2 guy, then late first round. And now we're talking about 3rd overall. So I think that is fascinating to see. And I always love NFL draft time, like this time out, because the narratives build who's a leader, who wasn't a captain, all this stuff. I think it's ridiculous because at the end of the day, the talent is going to show in Justin Fields, and he has so much of it. So, yeah, I think these are baseless claims. I think that people attacking him for the Ohio State thing, they're lazy. And I think Justin Fields, just like you said, spectacular talent. I would pick him 3rd overall if I were the Niners. We'll see what happens. Part of me thinks it's smoke just because someone wants him to fall. I hope so, because these claims are really unfair. You've seen everyone come to his defense who played with him. Yeah. And it's just not true. He wasn't the first guy out. He wasn't the last guy in. They were debunking these narratives. And so it's fascinating to see what's going to happen because I think the draft, he could really go anywhere. He could go 3, he could go 15. It is fascinating to see his ceiling when he was a guy going into the year who was 1A, 1B with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, and like that's the thing. Like he's like, I think like, and you can make an argument, I think, between him and Zach Wilson. And I think it depends for me. It's like the preference of what you want. I think Wilson has the bigger ceiling, and like he's the guy that you see you see it all. I don't have to get into it, but I think he is the higher ceiling. But looking at a guy like Fields, he's the guy that's gonna, I think, be more pro ready right away. And then Wilson, I think he's gonna need some coaching. I think like Mahomes, I think to become Mahomes, he needed Andy Reid. And I think that's, you talk about Wilson, who has like that Mahomes type arm, he's going to need an Andy Reid if he wants to reach his full potential. And, I think for the Jets' sake, we'll see if they have it or they don't with their new coaching. And, we really haven't seen, anything yet. So we'll just have to watch that out. But, with Justin Fields, he's a guy that'll be more pro ready. Maybe his ceiling isn't as higher, but I think he'll still be a solid QB. And like you talk about the Ohio State thing, how lazy is it? We're going to be talking about a guy like, Zach Wilson is from BYU. We're going to compare him to Taysom Hill just because they both played at BYU. Like, it's just, it's baseless. It makes no sense because you go with, because like Ohio State gets the comparisons. Also, Alabama gets the comparisons too. I think all the big schools, but you look at the small schools. Like for BYU, everyone talks about like Steve Young. Besides him, wasn't really much. So like it makes to me no sense, that one. And again, I feel like Fields, it's just, and like talking about Mac Jones, and I don't know if this is like a big knock on Mac Jones, what I'm about to say, but like for me, I think he's in the Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond. Like I think that he's there, who lit it up in college, and just I feel like they could be pro quarterbacks and maybe they'll start, but I don't think they're going to be like MVP type guys, really just tearing up the league. But they did in college. It'll be interesting. Like that's why I feel like he's more out that 2nd, 3rd round guy compared to the top 3. I just don't understand it. I just don't see it. I think there are things about him that are solid, but I mean, he's throwing wide open receivers. I mean, look at his receivers over the last 2 years. Those 4 guys all went in the, top 15. So that's, to me, is most interesting about these quarterbacks and talking about them. It just makes no sense for me between, Jones and Fields. But I do want to move over now to the Giants as a team. Obviously, they don't need a quarterback, but I feel like when I'm looking at all the mock drafts and with the Giants, and they're always getting mocked receivers, which is, to me, kind of interesting when they blatantly need other positions. They got their big receiver, Kenny Golladay, obviously, and they still need an lineman, pass rusher. And I just don't understand why everyone wants them to get that second receiver, like, a guy like Jalen Waddle compared to, and they already have some receivers. They still have Sterling Shepard, those type of guys. I just don't understand why they wouldn't want to fill out the roster with, someone either on either line, to be honest with you, offensive line or defensive line. To me, it just makes no sense.
Yeah, I feel like you could draw some parallels here to what the Cowboys did last year. So they pay Amari a ton of money, and then they still double up on receiver while they already had 2 solid guys in Amari and Gallup. And while, CeeDee Lamb's an awesome talent, you saw they needed other guys. They needed secondary help. The O-line with the injuries did not have the depth. So I feel like there's some parallels there where it's a hype beast pick. It's kind of like it's about the talent, right? Like, obviously, if they go receiver, it'd probably be a Jalen Waddle or a Smith or Chase if one of them fall to 11. But I think that when you evaluate this team, you need to get the overall thing rounded. You just paid Kenny Golladay money. You should be focusing on other positions. You talked about actually the either line. I agree. Their current group of edge rushers, had a combined 2.5 sacks in 2020. So if they can't generate a pass rush, the secondary is going to get exposed, and it's going to be not very fun for the Giants. So I think you could look at that. The only issue is, as I'm sure we talked about a little bit, like the pass rushers aren't really there for them at 11. No, not at all. I think that's kind of why we saw in free agency the overspend on guys, because it wasn't that strong in the draft. But the O-lineman, a guy that a lot of people see is Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern. That's a good fit there for them. They definitely need the O-line help. As you said, you got to give Daniel Jones everything, because this is a make or break year for him. You got to protect him. You gave him the weapons. He's going to get Saquon back. You need to see what you have in your quarterback, because if you're going into year 4, right, you got to decide, do I pick up the tag? You got to know now. You got to go now. Year 3 is what it takes for Daniel Jones. So I would try to help him in that aspect, because, if you don't have an O-line, it doesn't matter who's wide open. He's not going to get the ball to you. So, yeah, I don't agree at all with the Giants going receiver. Now, we should clarify, they're just getting mocked. That it's not like we're
exactly
all in. So I think that'd be a mistake for Gettleman. We'll see what he does there for sure, though.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me, different situation, but kind of reminds me of the Saquon pick. Like receivers the same way. Like, you're eventually going to have to pay him. Even if he's really good, you're eventually going to have to pay him. And if Daniel Jones is good, you're eventually going to have to pay him. You have to pay all these different skill position players, and the quarterback. It gets to be a lot. And I feel like when you're already paying a free agent with Kenny Golladay, which I think was an amazing pickup for them, I think you got to go to the O-line. And I feel like edge rushers, their perfect need, but the player's not there right now. Maybe it'll be in the second. And then usually when in doubt, you can't get, your first position of need, you go O-line. And I know that's always the Saints philosophy. And you always just try to add on the O-line because you always need it. And, no one talks about the O-line when it's good. Everyone always talks about it when it's not good and you're losing games and you're 5-11. But those are the areas where, good teams win. And, you talk about Rashawn Slater. I think he's, obviously second best tackle. I think he'd fit to the Giants perfectly. And then obviously they went tackle last year. So now you got your 2 tackles of the future. And I think that's really setting Jones up. We talked about Saquon. He's coming back at least. So, this is kind of it now for the Giants. And I think you're putting all your pieces together smartly too. Because you're not going after what the Cowboys did and putting 3 receivers, which is really not needed. And then more trying to, just build the offensive line, get some skill position players that you like, and then build it from there. And the defense was top 10 last year. So again, I feel like the smart decision, get an alignment. Hopefully they do. And it'll be interesting. Or who knows, maybe they'll reach for an edge rusher that they really like. I think that's going to be something that for the Giants will be, I think everyone talks about the Jets, but I think the Giants are almost in a bigger, point of their, progression here out of this rebuild, because, they have to see if Daniel Jones is good. They have to see if Dave Gettleman's the guy. And I think that's something that a lot of, anyone in the national media, even in New York, are really not talking about.
Yeah, there's been a lot of Jets heavy talk, but the Giants really are at a crossroads. They have to make a decision here.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's something that is going to be huge important. So before we stop our NFL talk, I want to talk about one thing is that, I feel like everyone likes to talk about the quarterbacks, top 10 picks, but I want to bring up some sleepers that maybe can go at the end of the first round, maybe beginning of the second, and could still be one of the top players of the draft. It's one of my favorite things to do, especially as a Saints fan. We don't have a high pick. Our highest pick is 28. So got to look at some guys a little farther down in that first round. So Ryan, what's one sleeper? Let's start like on defense. What's one sleeper you love that maybe, is being mocked or, projected to go down in the first round, but is one of those guys that should be, near the top?
So one guy that really fascinates me is Dylan Moses, the linebacker out of Alabama. I feel like 2-3 years ago, like he was a surefire top 10 pick on trajectory. He tears his ACL. He misses his entire junior year, and then he comes back for his senior year this year. He was shaky, and it's, he talked about after the season, he played the entire year with a torn meniscus. So I don't know how he did that and still put up the production he did. But if he's fully healthy, like he is a legit talent. The only concern with him is injury. I think he ran a 4.46 at his pro day. So the speed is there right now. He looks good. It's similar to kind of Jalen Smith, right? Like he was a surefire top pick, had the awful injury. They took a gamble on him in the second, and that worked out. Second contract hasn't really, but that's another story. So Dylan Moses, I think he's getting mocked anywhere from second to late first. So I wouldn't be shocked if I saw him in the late first, but he's a guy for me that I'm looking at on the defense. He can anchor it. He's a leader out there. So Dylan Moses for sure out of Bama, the linebacker, is someone that I think could be a sleeper in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I'm also going to go down like the guy that was top talent who's injured, and that's Caleb Farley, the cornerback, out of Virginia Tech. And he's a guy that's a really good prospect. He just has back issues. And I feel like when teams hear back issues, especially from skill positions, they just say nope, and they're not going to pick him. And, when you do have, this cornerback draft is pretty solid. You had J.C. Horn and, you have Patrick Surtain, and like those guys are definitely like your top two. I think Fairley may have more talent than them. It's just because the injuries, those kind of hold you back. And if I'm a team maybe like the Saints who need a cornerback at 28, Fairley's still on the board. The doctors are supposedly saying everything's fine with him, but, he did have back spasms in the past, and then he sat out this season, but then he needed back surgery like only like a month ago. So that to me is a little odd that you sat out the season but didn't get the surgery until now. He should be ready for training camp. I think that's kind of what the doctors are saying. But he's a guy that, really solid footwork, really good technique, and he has great ball skills. I think in 2019 he had like 4 interceptions. So he's able to get his hands on the ball, make plays. It's just kind of the injuries, the thing. And, that's something that will be interesting. I think that if he's healthy, I think he's going to be, to me, the top corner in this draft. And, if he stays healthy this year, you may see him in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, I think it depends on fit, obviously, but if he goes to the right team, like a Saints, you put him opposite Marshawn Lattimore, I think that is, that's gonna be something to watch. And, I think a team like the Saints, they'll need it because they go up against great receivers week in, week out in that division, the NFC South. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here with Fairley. And then, the second guy I have going over to the offense is Kadarius Toney out of Florida. This wide receiver, he just gets open. Reminds me a lot of Justin Jefferson, in college, just got open at LSU. And, he ended up going into later first round, like pick 20, and ended up having just an amazing season for the Vikings. I mean, you saw him in the Senior Bowl. He was getting like 5-6 yards of separation. And like, I know the Senior Bowl, you don't want to put everything into that, but still extremely impressive, and did it throughout college. And, he was, in that Florida offense, I know he was, number 2 to Kyle Pitts, but still, I think he's got a ton of talent. Those type of guys, if you can get open in this level, and I think he'll be able to, I think he'll be really good. Had 10 touchdowns last season. I could see him maybe, I think after Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase is number 1 hands down. I think he may be better than those Alabama guys. I think he may have a better career. I think he can play slot, the outside. I think that will help him year 1. Kadarius Toney, I'm getting on the hype train. I'm getting on the Kadarius Toney hype train.
He's just like an offensive weapon. Like I wouldn't even.
Yeah, he's a great player.
He's just so good in separation. As you talked about, he gets open. One guy that I'm looking at, and I'm going to stick receivers because I think this is actually a stacked receiver class. There's maybe 7-8 guys off the top of my head who could go in any order really after Chase. And, there's going to be one guy that we're going to look at in a year from now and be like, how is this guy the 7th guy taken? And it's just going to show the depth of this class. So one guy that I'm looking at is Rashad Bateman out of Minnesota. He's such a good route runner, really crisp, and I think that'll play in the next level. He has solid hands. I'm a 40-yard dash guy. I talked about him before. He ran a 4.39 at Minnesota's pro day. So he's got the NFL speed to work at the next level. And I do think, like, with this collection of route running and his speed, I think it really plays. Obviously, he goes to Minnesota, and I know senior year of high school he blows up. He gets SEC offers all over the place, but he honors his commitment to Minnesota. He breaks records every year. I know he had a huge freshman year, kept building off it. And then this year, obviously, obviously the Big Ten was up and down with COVID. So I think he took himself out midway through the year, stayed healthy. Rashad Bateman, wide receiver out of Minnesota. He's a guy that I think with his ability to run routes and his speed, I think is a guy we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and I think the NFL every year, you kind of see it. I feel like the wide receivers, like everyone talks about like the top 3 guys, but then it ends up being like the 5th or 6th guy taken that ends up being the best receiver. It's kind of seeing it with Justin Jefferson, kind of seeing it with like a guy like Michael Thomas, who was picked in the 2nd round. But I mean, definitely very, very interesting. I just cannot wait for this draft. And I'm not even a Jets or Giants fan. Like my team's picking 28 and I still can't wait for it. It should be definitely really, really fun. But I think this will wrap up our conversation on the NFL. Next, we'll be joined by Sam, finishing out our show, looking over baseball over the last 2 weeks. It's time for all the overreactions, all of that stuff. We'll be looking at both the American League and the National League. But first, we are going to take our last break here on One on 90.7 FM.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
We're back here on One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Ryan Gregware and Sam Davis. And now, guys, let's finish off the show with some fun here, looking at baseball over these last 2 weeks. And again, obviously really starts the season, very, very early impressions, but we'll take a look, AL and NL. And I mean, look at the AL. That's where I want to start, because right now you have the Red Sox, Royals, and Mariners leading the division. And look, I feel like if the Red Sox, I think at least we're supposed to be like an 80-win team, but the Royals and Mariners were expected to be in the cellars for sure. So again, I feel like this is just going to be a crazy American League this year. To me, there's no favorite right now, especially with the Yankees not playing so good. So Sam, we'll start off with you. Your Red Sox playing hot, and I mean some other teams as well. Just who would have thought, the Mariners, Royals. What's your thoughts early on about this American League?
So I'm not gonna overreact here about the Red Sox. I'm not gonna do that because my expectations going into the year for this team were very low. I will admit that for sure. I really liked getting Alex Cora back. I think that's definitely a boost just for this clubhouse. I think he's definitely a player's manager. A lot of guys like him, and they seem to be playing much better with him. The biggest thing that's impressed me with this Red Sox team is their starting rotation, which I would say is probably one of the weak points of this team in general, especially Chris Sale. Obviously, he's hurt. He's your ace. So with him not really in the forecast, at least for this Red Sox team, until it seems like about the All-Star break, maybe even afterwards. And we talked about the Yankees with Severino. You never know coming back from injury, especially with pitchers here. So you don't know how effective Sale's going to be when he's back. But I think what's reassuring is the guys around him right now on this team who have stepped up. I mean, Nathan Eovaldi has stepped up huge for this rotation. He's not your ace. He's not really an ace for any team, but he's certainly a very good option that I think if Chris Sale does come back and is at least relatively effective, Eovaldi kind of slides into that number 3 spot behind Sale and Eduardo Rodriguez, who's another good piece who has been back, has been pitching better. He's going to continue to pitch better. I really like Erod. I think he's great for that rotation as well. So those 3 guys, I think are key. They make for a very decent rotation right now. I would say they're overachieving. The whole team is overachieving, but it starts with that starting pitching, which is overachieving because this lineup is I'm tremendous in my opinion. I think it's a very good lineup. I mean, you got stars in that lineup like Devers, like Bogarts, JD Martinez has been tearing it up. And then you got some really good young guys too. I mean, you have Alex Verdugo, he's still young in that outfield. You have Franchi Cordero. You got other nice young pieces surrounding them. It's just a lot of optimism, I would say, for this lineup. But the Red Sox kind of live and die with that starting pitching. And I think if they can find a way to continue to pitch this well, you could look at this Red Sox team as potentially maybe sneaking in there for a wild card, especially in this American League, which, I mean, we're going to talk about it. It's certainly not the best. It's a lot weaker than the National League, which we'll get into. But if the Red Sox can keep that starting pitching up, I have no doubt this lineup is going to continue to produce. These guys, I mean, Devers, seeing JD Martinez hit again, obviously a down year last year has been amazing for this team. We certainly need him in general. But for the Red Sox, it definitely starts with that starting pitching. If they can continue to pitch well, I think they could find themselves in a wild card spot, or at least in the hunt down the stretch, which I think is all you could really ask for in an organization that is certainly in a rebuild.
Yeah, the Red Sox have been, I think, maybe the story of the season so far, right? The 9 in a row, as you talked about. I think we all knew they were going to hit, right? Like JD, great bounce back for him, 378 with 5 homers on the year. He's killing it. Bogarts, Devers, obviously, we know the names. They have a good lineup, but the pitching was always the concern, right? They don't really, with Chris Sale out, they don't have a true ace. They maybe have 3 number 3s, and then they kind of piece it together there. But Nate Eovaldi stepped up. He's always had the stuff. He's just always been inconsistent. 2.08 ERA, as you talked about. I do think that's overachieving a little bit. He's not going to be your ace all year. So they're definitely a team that, I'm looking towards, because with Alex Cora back, like maybe they get the persona, the aura back with, obviously Alex Cora was there for that 2018 championship team, which is one of the best Red Sox teams ever. So I do think the Red Sox are going to be, they're not going to be quiet all year. Obviously last year was a brutal year for them, even with the 60-game season. I think most Red Sox fans were thrilled it was only 60 games because they didn't have to watch that product on the field.
Yes.
But I do think this year is a little different. I think they got a little better. And, if they're serious about contending, they'll need to address the pitching. But I think Bloom's plan taking over this team it wasn't going to be right away. So I think he's slowly building it up. Some of his moves have been critiqued a lot. But they do look good early on, so we'll see what happens with the Sox.
I mean, I think the Red Sox, who would have thought they'd ever win 9 games in a row? Just this rotation, no one expected it to be good. And, to win 9 games in a row, you need solid starting. And, that's one thing. If you can put together wins, your rotation's pretty solid. You put together 9 wins, and we'll see how long it lasts. And I think Sale coming back, hopefully, maybe, I think he said he was going to take it easy, but maybe if they're in contention, they may, speed that up a little bit. You'll have to see for him. And, again, I feel like with the Red Sox, if they're in it, I think it's going to be just like any team that in the AL, because I think a lot of teams in the AL, they're, above average to good, but no team's great. And, I think that means the trade deadline, some team's going to get great. And I think we've seen it throughout, just over baseball in the last 10 years. Usually big pitcher goes, a big hitter goes, and that changes a team's, whole season. And I think that in the American League, you see that spot. I mean, even like the Mets in 2015, like that Mets team, I mean, that National League wasn't that good. The Cubs team that was on the up and up, but wasn't there completely. The Dodgers, I mean, they weren't at this apex Dodgers yet either. They had some veterans as well. And like the Mets kind of just snuck in there because they got Cespedes and they had a good pitching staff. And that's why I think about this American League. You can kind of see a lot of teams catching hot at the right time, getting the right pieces. And that's why, like, we talked about the Yankees earlier about how they were like, oh, well, everyone got worse, so that just puts us up. That's not how, not just the MLB, it's not how sports work. Teams are going to try to get better. A team that may be surprised is going to be like, oh, like the Padres last year. Oh, we're now ready to go. We're in a pennant race. Now let's add. And I think a team probably will do that in the American League. And maybe it ends up being the Yankees and they're still, they end up staying the favorite now and continue to do that. But I think right now, this American League, I think it's going to be an unknown team. I mean, could be the Red Sox, just how good they're playing, but their rotation will have to stay better and they'll have to add to it most likely. And you'll need Sale to come back and be that ace. And I think that right now, if you're an American League team, you start off hot, could be maybe your year.
Yeah, I mean, the door is like certainly wide open, and that's why it's really hard for me not to get ahead of myself as a Red Sox fan here, just because the Yankees aren't playing well. The Red Sox have found themselves winning a bunch of games in a row. The rotation looks good. And like you said, it's kind of up for grabs. I think the trade deadline will be a big, important play here for these American League teams. But sticking in the American League, I want to touch on the Blue Jays, too, who I think have been pretty, I would say, relatively optimistic about them, too, as well. I mean, their lineup, talking about another lineup that is just really fun to watch. And a bunch of another example, kind of similar to the Red Sox, younger stars that are coming up and playing really well. Obviously, Bichette, Biggio, and Vladdy Jr. there. And nice pieces around it, too. I mean, George Springer still hasn't even played a game for the Blue Jays here in the regular season. So that was their big acquisition this offseason. The Blue Jays are still staying afloat. I think they're going to be kind of an issue for the Yankees going forward. I still think this is the Yankees division to lose. I would be surprised, very surprised, if the Yankees lose this division. But the Blue Jays present an interesting case for me because there is one obvious and glaring issue, and it's the starting pitching for them. Matz has been nice. I think that was a nice addition. And Ryu there leading it is good, but he another guy who's not really an ace for your staff. I mean, he's a very good pitcher, but kind of like we talked about with Eovaldi, not really a guy you consider an ace. So the Blue Jays, I'd say the starting pitching certainly needs to improve, and I think that's where they're still kind of a step away. But right now, with a wide open American League, this Blue Jays team, I could certainly see them contending down the stretch, at least for a wild card in this division, because it's just wide open. And I think, they obviously need to improve, but maybe they decide if they're hanging around in the division come trade deadline time, the Blue Jays decide this is our year. We're going to kind of go for it. We're going to make a move to get a starting pitcher and try and really make a push at this, because obviously they're young and they're still trying to build on what they have. But if it's a wide open American League this year, why not go and get a guy at the deadline, really push this issue, especially when the Yankees right now are struggling. And I mean, if they don't get another piece for their rotation, they may continue to struggle and may continue to just barely kind of hold on to this division. So the Blue Jays, I think, have a really interesting scenario where they are, because come trade deadline time, if they're hanging around, they could definitely make a push for the playoffs. And I think that lineup is certainly suited for October.
I mean, I have no reason to think they wouldn't make a push, right? This offseason, they were really aggressive. They signed Springer and they tried their best to pry DJ LeMahieu away from the Yankees. Obviously, they brought in Ryu as well. And I do agree with you. I think this AL East is a lot better than people thought, because going into the year, it was obviously the Yankees on top. Rays coming off a World Series seemingly got a lot worse by, losing Morton and Snell. And then it was kind of, you have the Orioles, the Red Sox, they're in the cellar, and the Blue Jays are kind of in the middle, right? They squeaked into that 8th spot in the expanded playoffs last year. They're young, but they have taken steps forward. Vlad Guerrero Jr., as you talked about, he's breaking out so far. I know it's early, but he was such a hype prospect, and he's finally putting it together. We'll see if that's a full year. Bo Bichette is awesome at shortstop, such a pretty swing. And, I've been watching them because they've been playing the Yankees, and they've looked like the better team so far. They won both series. They've won some close games. the bullpen is kind of shut down. They shut down the Yankees, at least in some of those close games, went to extra innings a few times. So I agree with you. I think the Blue Jays are a team there. Another team in the AL that, I hate to even bring them up is the Astros. I despise the Astros, but I can't help but look at them. I think they're going to be sneaky good this year. The lineup, it lost Springer, but it still has those core guys, Altuve, Correa, Brantley, Yuli Gurriel. It's still a solid lineup that does damage to pitchers. Dusty Baker is one of the all-time good guys in the game, so it hurts to root against him, which is what I do. But, he's a great manager there. He deserves to get over the top. Hopefully it's not with the Astros. But I think with the rotation too, it's a little concerning, but we've seen the Astros kind of figure out pitchers and reinvent them. I know Odorizzi not off to the best start. Greinke, some guys have got rocked a little bit, but I think they'll figure it out. And I think with that offense, they're going to surprise some teams. Obviously last year with the COVID and everything, they're a 500 team, and then they kind of got hot in the playoffs, and they almost pulled off a remarkable 3-0 comeback that I feel like a lot of people, try to forget because it was the Astros, and that would have been really tough if we saw them back there. But so I think the Astros will, they'll be there at the end of the day. I think the Blue Jays will be sneaky good, and I do think the AL is completely up for grabs. I don't think any spot's locked up right now. I think every team who wants to make some noise, including the Yankees, will have to fight for it. They won't be able to kind of throw these lineups together that the Yankees have been doing. Obviously, no urgency yet, but, if they keep losing games, there's going to be some urgency. So I do think it's interesting early on, Royals and Mariners. Obviously, I don't know if I expect that to be there at the end of the day, but it's early in the season. They're the hot teams right now. So they're in first, and we'll see what happens. It's a long season.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a 60-game sprint like the Marlins, like when they had their little, 60-game run. Like, I don't think they, it would probably be if this was 60 games, the Royals would be that team, the Mariners would be that team. But I think if last year you played 162, I don't think the Marlins would have been in it. That's just what I think. And then, just 2 points. I mean, you talk about the Blue Jays and how they all got all the young stars that their dads are from like 90 stars. I find that so funny, which is like, hey, and they're all playing really well right now. And to me, like overall, I think in the American League, it's just a lot of teams that have good offenses and they have like one or two pitchers, but then they need one more, and they just need one more. And I think you could put the Yankees in that, the White Sox in it, and you could keep going down the list, and Blue Jays in it as well. And you talk about the Twins probably too. It's just, it'll be interesting to see. I think the trade deadline will probably, decide this league, which is, kind of interesting. We're saying that in April still, but right now, no team has really solidified themselves. And again, it'll be interesting to see who does that or who tries. I think the Yankees, that's going to be obviously our attention, and it'll be interesting to see if they go out and maybe, they go out, try to, get that arm, but it'll be interesting to see if Cashman wants to. And I think that was another thing that Ryan brought up earlier, but I think that's going to wrap up our American League talk. Definitely a fun league to talk about just because how wide open it is. But the National League, you look at what it is, and I don't think it's as wide open, but you have some players that it's going to be a fun, if these teams get in the playoffs, it should be really, really fun. You look out West, and I want to start there because, we just had the first game of the season between the Padres and Dodgers. Dodgers won that game, and it seems like this rivalry is going to be great. You have Fernando Tatis hitting home runs in his first game back, and like just that rivalry in the NL West. And I think you could say the same about the NL East with the Mets and Braves, and I have some words about that. But I feel like looking at this West, hats off to the Padres, and I really hope that they end up taking over the Dodgers somehow, some way. I don't think it's going to happen. My brother's a huge Padres fan, so I'm happy for him. And the Dodgers, after they got Trevor Bauer, I'm just so sour on that situation, how he spurned the Mets. I'm just like so against the Dodgers right now. I hope he gives up 9 runs every single time out there. And Taijuan Walker continues to have the better ERA because that was obviously the guy the Mets got instead. And, looking at this Padres team, I give them a ton of credit for still going after it, even with the Dodgers there. And I give them a lot of credit to maybe, being this good. They may be a 95-win team and have to play in a wild card game and be 10 games out of the division and not even be close. Like, I give them a lot of credit to, go up and still be able to, build a really good team, even though you have a team lurking, in there, with the Dodgers, who could be one of the best, we'll see how they grow up, but one of the better dynasties that we've seen really in our generation.
Yeah, this NL West kind of reminds me of the AL East from, I think, 2018 when the Red Sox ended up winning the World Series, because that Yankees team won over 100 games and they ended up finishing in second place. And that's kind of a crazy example, but I could very well see that happening because this Padres team is very good. I think they're legit. And obviously, Watching that game yesterday was incredible. It felt the closest thing to playoff baseball in April you could ever get. I mean, the game really had everything. Like you said, Tatis coming back, that was really electric, and an extra innings game as well. It really had all of it. And I think the eyes of the entire baseball world will be on the West Coast every single time these teams match up against each other, because this just seems to be the biggest rivalry out there in baseball right now, almost. And in terms of the Padres, when the Dodgers ended up getting Bauer, I almost felt kind of bad for the Padres at first, just because of how good their team is. And I know that they were really a team that I thought would have contended with the Dodgers before Bauer for that division. Now it's really hard to think that. And then you add in, the Padres, Mike Clevenger's out for the year. That's a really tough loss for them. Dinelson Lamet is another good pitching piece for them. He's hurt. I mean, he should be back, but you add that into the equation too. This Padres team isn't even as good as they will be in the future. So that's something to think about as well. But right now it's just really tough. They're in a tough situation, having to have the Dodgers right in front of them. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll challenge this Padres team. They can get even better. They can really give the Dodgers a run this year. And then, unfortunately, it seems like they're going to have to end up playing a one-game wild card after winning maybe 90, 95, 100 games, something like that. And they might have to face a guy like DeGrom or even the Braves, and a really good player there too as well. So that's just, I feel certainly bad for the Padres a little bit, but at the same time, I know that they're young. They're going to get even better. Like I said, once their rotation, Clevenger being back in that rotation is huge. Obviously you got Blake Snell. That's a huge piece for them as well. They're only going to get better, I think. And I think this year that NL West is going to be a showdown. It's going to be fun to watch just as a general baseball fan all year. These two teams battle it out, but I do think the Dodgers will come out on top. They're just too good for me to doubt them at all.
I mean, you want to talk about a plan B after the Clevenger injury. They pick up Joe Musgrove from the Pirates. They trade seemingly no prospects. And what does he do? He throws a no-hitter in his second or third start. The San Diego native, it was hard for me to see because I know the Yankees this offseason, they tried for him. They settled on Taillon. Right now, Musgrove's taken off, and Taillon's obviously we talked about earlier. But, yeah, I agree. I think the Dodgers are just too good. Like, as boring as it is to say, I can't see a way that they get dethroned. I mean, the rotation is just ridiculous. Like, I think they have 7 guys, and I really do. Like, I think they have 7 guys that would start on every other team. Like, I just think they're so deep, and that doesn't even – like, David Price doesn't even start. I mean, it is ridiculous to see the depth that the Dodgers at least do have. And this series this weekend, super fun, great opening, great first game. Kershaw, Darvish today, obviously. They really, I think, are the class of the NL. I'm sure Andrew will sneak the Mets in there in a second here. But I do think that, it will be interesting with the one-game playoff, right? Because as you talked about that 2018 AL East, it doesn't matter. You could be the number 2 team in the AL, but if the team in front of you is in your division, you have 1 game for your season. So it always is tough when that is the reality. And if that is against a Jacob deGrom, then that's tougher because then you're probably going home. So we'll see how it shapes out. I'm enjoying this series. Right now, I think it is West Coast baseball. I think that's what you're talking about. If you're on the West Coast, it's these 2 teams matching up 17 times this year. It'll be a treat, but, as boring as it is to say, the Dodgers 12-2 to start the year. I mean, talk about a start. Like, coming off the World Series, any thought of a hangover, not even a question right now. They retooled. They got better off the World Series, which, you see a lot of teams, they kind of get complacent or they don't add. They just keep, this Dodgers team was aggressive, right? Adding a Trevor Bauer. So, good for them. They went over the luxury tax, the only team to do it. And, it turns out when you spend, you win, right? Like these teams that were all getting cheap and trying to stay under the tax, the one team who goes over they're seeing the benefits right now of winning baseball and a great team. So I do also think the Dodgers are the team to beat in the NL, but the Padres will give them a run for their money because that rotation's legit. And obviously, we know Slam Diego with that offense. So it'll be fun seeing these teams match up, and I'm looking forward to the rest of their games.
Man, I'm just with the Dodgers. It's unfair. It really is. I mean, at this point, I think the only team that could probably out them would be in like the divisional round. I do think I want to see the Mets in it. I want to see the Mets somehow get to play them in the divisional round because I don't think they can win a 7-game series. But if you got DeGrom to pitch one and Syndergaard or Stroman's back, and you could just basically steal a series because that's really what it would be. I think the Mets may be the only shot in that type of series in the National League and probably the American League as well. Just are a team with a really good pitching staff. I mean, if the Padres would ever match up against them, I think they're another team. But I think the Mets, I mean, I think DeGrom is such a big pawn. He's almost like an automatic, and I think he'll be in the playoffs too, like an automatic 7 innings, 1 run, or no runs, or 2 runs. Like, and that'll just keep you in the game and hopefully give you the win. And like that's why I feel like when looking now, turning over to the NL East, that's why I think the Mets are dangerous. And they may be even more dangerous than the Braves, who had a great season last year. And, I don't know, I still think the Braves probably will end up winning the division, and I'll get to that in a second. But I think the Mets, out of those 2 teams, just that pitching staff, and I think the hitting's good enough. That's what you need: clutch hitting, good pitching staff, and you can really make a lot of damage. You saw the Nationals do it, even without Bryce Harper. They lose Bryce Harper, get a few more clutch hitters, and then they're the World Series champions still with that great rotation. And I feel like when looking at Mets and Braves, so I think it's like Dodgers, Padres, and then Mets, Braves, you're 3-4. And the Braves have always been a thorn in my side just because they're always the fundamental team. They do everything right. And the Mets are like the opposite. They always did everything wrong. They always threw to the wrong base. You had Mickey Callaway filling out the wrong lineup cards. It was like, and the Braves are just the opposite of that. They could be good or they could be bad. And, they still play fundamentally solid baseball. And that's why they won the NL East for like 20 straight years, back in the 90s and early 2000s. And, they're basically that similar team. They got the young stars, but it's beyond the stars. It's just kind of their way of going about it is, it's like kind of like the antithesis of the old Mets. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see how Steve Cohen works. I think it's going to be them against the Braves, over the next 3 years. Can they overtake them eventually? I think you're probably 1 year too soon, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happens between those 2 teams. But I think really the measuring stick for the Mets, and really they're ready to win a World Series, I think, is if they can win the NL East. If they can win the NL East and beat out the Braves, I think they're ready to win and have a lot of success in the postseason.
Yeah, I think in terms of the Mets postseason success, I think you're right. I think it comes down to going out and winning that NL East, because unfortunately, like we just talked about with the Padres getting a tough draw, I mean, the Mets would also get a tough draw if they were to match up with the Padres in a wild card game. They could very well go out and lose that game against a pitcher like Blake Snell. I mean, that's no guarantee. I know DeGrom's on the hill, but the Mets obviously have some issues with run support with him. So there's no guarantee, which I think almost makes this season almost even more important for the Mets. And this kind of battle between the Mets and Braves, I think, really important. And it's also going to be really fun to watch going forward, because the winner of this division will have the opportunity to avoid that 1-game playoff. They'll have the opportunity to rest and then take on a team that maybe even a team from the NL Central, which I'm certainly not buying at all, that entire division there. So I think the winner of the NL East definitely has a strong advantage over who ends up having to be in that wild card game. But I think that separation between those 2 teams is going to be incredibly close, because obviously this Mets team, we talked a lot about them. They need to get their starting pitchers back, but their rotation's already good and going to get even better. The Braves rotation is also very solid. I mean, I think they have a very good rotation as well, a very good lineup. It's just an overall very solid team. And I think maybe the Mets, I'm going to agree with you, Andrew. I think they might be a year away, just because this bullpen is the one glaring issue for this Mets team. The Braves don't have as big of a glaring issue, I don't think. But you don't really know. The Mets could go out and get a guy at the deadline, and then all of a sudden they could find themselves ending up winning this division. I think it's going to be very close. But unfortunately, the loser is going to have to play in an awesome wildcard game that I think every MLB fan would be so excited to watch. But for those 2 individual teams, it's going to end up bad for one of them, who ends up having to lose that game, even though they are certainly qualified. And put either of those teams in the American League, like we just talked about, they're probably winning a division out there. So it's certainly, I would say, a little difficult for the Mets in the NL East. But overall, I think this Mets-Braves matchup, like you said, Andrew, is going to be a storyline, not just this year, but going forward as well for the next couple years. And it's going to be certainly a fun matchup to watch.
Yeah, a few things. One, Andrew, you talked about how DeGrom guaranteed 7 innings, 1 run. Do you even take that if you're a Mets fan, like the way that they hit for him? I don't know if you sign up for that, because can you score more than a run? You might need him to go 9 shutout. No. The Braves, too, I think are really interesting, because they gave the Dodgers a legitimate run for their money. They had them up 3-1, right? And they had leads in game 6, and I think game 7 was tied, and then Bellinger hits that home run, right? They win it. But like the Braves were right up there with them last year, and it looked like, looked like Rays was going to be the World Series for a little bit. Dodgers were obviously able to climb out of the hole and get there, but like the Braves being right there just shows that they have the talent to make noise. And you talked about the rotation, Sam. It's, right now they're injured. Fried's hurt, and they'll get back, but they add Morton in the offseason, who is a big game pitcher. He's won some big games. He's won some World Series games. And this lineup, too, is awesome. Ronald Acuna, I mean, it's early, but he's the MVP of the league, batting like .480 with like 6 homers, just ridiculous numbers for Acuna, beating out grounders to short, popping up on infield fly balls. He's just electric to watch out there. And so I think the Braves, I do agree with you guys, like Mets, I just don't think are there right now. Like, I think the Braves just have more talent. So I expect them to win this division. A little bit of a slow start, but they're bouncing back just a little bit here. So I do like the Braves to come out of the East. And I still think though the Mets are close, and it will be unfortunate that one of them will have to go to the wildcard game and face probably the loser of the NL West. We don't want to speculate, right? There's so much time, but the way that these rosters look and the way that these teams are playing, it seemed like that would be my bet that we'll get those 2 divisions there. We talked about the Central just briefly. I don't buy it either. I think 3 of those teams are in limbo. 2 are rebuilding. It's a weird time. I guess the Cardinals are kind of going for it with Arenado, but really weird time in the Central. It seems like the loser of the West and the East would be much more suited to, not have to go to a wildcard game than the winner of that division. But yeah, so I'll agree with you guys on the Braves. I do think, they are a team to look out for. They have disappointed a little bit in the playoffs recently. That 3-1, choke kind of, I don't like saying choke, but choke, it's kind of inexcusable, right? You had the Dodgers up in Game 5. So the Braves will be back, I think. I think the Mets will be contending for sure. And yeah, I mean, a potential wildcard game, it's so weird that we're already talking about that this early. But DeGrom in a 1-game playoff, like I'd sign up for that any day of the week. Get to face Tatis, I'm all in on that.
I mean, for me, the one thing I will say about the NL East, whoever wins that, they'll get to play the Central team. And I'd much rather play the winner of the Central to whoever comes out of that wild card game, whoever it ends up being from those 2 divisions. Even if, like, let's say the Dodgers win 105 and they're playing a Mets team that just had DeGrom go, 8 innings shutout on their way to like a 1-0 win over the Padres, or if the Padres slug out the Mets and they beat up DeGrom and they win that game and they're feeling confident. And I feel like that's something that whoever wins that wild card game, they could make damage, just because obviously you want the rest, but it's only 1 game. And if you can just, if you believe you can do it. I mean, I think that was something with the Nats. They believed, they ended up coming back and beating the Brewers. And after that, it was like, okay, let's go. And like, they were able to do that. And before we wrap up, I just want to say, I want to see Trevor Bauer at Citi Field in the playoffs, and just want to hear that. I just want to hear that. And I want to see his Twitter reaction after that, how he's going to be, like how pissed off he's going to be because everyone was booing him. And I'd like to see Lindor do the whole Cespedes thing, the grand slam where he had the bat flip in 2015. I want to see that so badly. And just like, that's my little Trevor Bauer rant before we wrap up the show. But I think that with all that said, we covered a lot here from football, baseball. Definitely had a lot of fun. If you missed any part of the show and you want to check out our highlights or the entire program, go to WFUV Sports YouTube page, also WFUVsports.org. The sports director at WFUV is Bobby Chaffardini. Sorry about that. Thanks to our producer, Alex Wolves, as always, for keeping the lights on. You are the best. So for Sam Davis with the headlines and my partner, Ryan Gregware, I'm Andrew Gullotta, telling everyone to have a great rest of your night and get some sleep. One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports.